Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It is an ordinary day at the Oregon coast, and a beautiful day it is too. The sky is a serene cup of blue, without a fluffy cotton wool cloud in sight, as Sylvia is smiling brightly when she carries her beautiful 6-month baby boy in his portable Moses basket to the beach. She is walking side by side with her husband Dusty, who is a well-built, handsome young man, boasting a tattoo of his wife on one of his arms, with a caption underneath the tattoo which reads, "Mine forever," which does make people raise an eyebrow or two when they see it. He is as proud as Punch to be a father, and is wearing a very contented smile on his face. He has told anyone who will listen that he's a father because he wants the whole world to know that he has fathered a baby boy, whom he hopes will be a chip off the old block. This morning he's sporting a pair of denim knee-high shorts and a snug-fitting bright orange golfing shirt, and his pretty wife is wearing a floating creamy summer dress covered in pink peony flowers, and her long blonde hair, with its auburn highlights, is blowing back in the breeze like the stunning hair you see on L'Oreal advertisements for shampoo. Sylvia looks beautiful this morning, her peachy skin gleaming, her blue eyes sparkling. Too bad they look a little melancholic. If her husband Dusty is being completely honest with himself, he knows that he is responsible for putting the sadness in his wife's eyes. But he perpetually persuades himself that he's going to change big time. But his promises that he makes to himself, like the New Year's resolutions people make every year, have a nasty habit of losing their potency and becoming as diluted as many other promises people tend to make themselves. And Dusty is a master artist at persuading himself that tomorrow will be a brand new day, not adulterated by the grey, rather grim stains of his regret. "What brought this all on?" Sylvie, he asks, looking at her through narrowing eyes that hint of suspicion, as they casually saunter along the beach together, walking side by side in bare feet, kicking up the sea sand and enjoying the fragrant scent of the salt in the air. A couple of seagulls soar above them, shrieking. The sound of the waves crashes violently against the shoreline. It's very tranquilizing to the couple, who both love and adore the Oregon coast. Dusty is carrying an icebox containing a few beers and some soft drinks in his right hand, and in his left hand he's carrying a small picnic basket, while his wife diligently carries the Moses basket. He's not used to any romantic overtures on his wife's part, who's always retreating from him rather than embracing him these days. She seems to have become like a frosty ice queen towards him of late, which he finds incredibly frustrating and terribly annoying. He's seen the fear in her eyes when he closes in for a hug, for she visibly flinches, as if she's expecting him to lash out at her like an angry cat with razor-sharp claws. Sometimes Sylvia makes him feel like a monster. All right, he will admit he's got a bit of a temper on him that seems to become heightened every time he's had a drink or two, when for some reason the smallest thing can make him erupt like a volcano. But he can't help it if his wife Sylvia winds him up the wrong way. So if he gets capriciously belligerent from time to time towards her, it's hardly his fault. He's done things he wishes he could take back, when the indelible reminders of his punches can be seen by the bruises on his wife's body. He can't help it if he's got very high standards and is punctilious, liking things to be done a certain way. And his wife can be so sloppy at times, and that drives him mad. And then sometimes he just loses it and lashes out. But the main thing is he never intended to do it. It's an impulsive knee-jerk reaction, and he can hardly be blamed for that. If Sylvia did things right, none of this need ever happen.
I must confess, I'm rather surprised with your spontaneity today, Sylvia, requesting a picnic on the beach of all things. It's most unlike you to be like this, but what a beautiful day it is, and I think it's a grand idea.
Sylvia manages a stiff, rather wry smile, even though it hurts to smile, due to the bruising on her face that she has masterfully covered with concealer, that she is so tired of telling people at the restaurant where she works as a waitress that she's bumped into the door again for the zillionth time. When she tells them she's such a klutz, the waitressing and managerial staff at the restaurant roll their eyes knowingly at each other, because there's only so many times you can walk into a door before your excuses begin to fall onto mute ears. Her work colleague took her to one side recently, after observing her black eye, and said gingerly, "Sylvia, listen to me, girl. You don't need to pretend to me, or to any of us for that matter. I know exactly what's going on with your husband. Everybody knows what Dusty Cladessa is like. If there's any brawl in this town, your husband is usually behind it. Most people describe Dusty as a thug. I don't know why you don't leave him, Sylvie. File for a restraining order against him. Everybody knows that you did not walk into a door, so you can quit protecting that deplorable husband of yours. Dusty should be ashamed of himself for laying a hand on you. Any man who beats up a woman is not a man in my book, but a monster. You shouldn't stay with someone who treats you like this. If you ever need a safe place to stay, you only have to ask. You're welcome to come to my apartment any time you like. And you can stay there as long as you like, until you find a safe place to stay." Sylvia had been unable to hold back the tears, brought on by her work colleague's kindness, which she hurriedly wiped away with the back of her sleeve. "Dusty's not always a monster, you know," she tried to reassure Zalia, who does not look remotely convinced by her valiant persuasions. "I promise you, Dusty has got some redeeming qualities, but sometimes he just lashes out. He gets so mad by the smallest thing." Zalia had shrugged her shoulder. "I don't know how to say this to you, Sylvia, but from where I'm standing, I think you need to get out of your relationship with Dusty. One day you might not be nursing just a black eye. One day he might actually kill you, and I don't say that lightly. If one day you just suddenly disappear off the face of the earth, everybody will know that Dusty disposed of your body." Sylvia's eyes grew as round as saucers at Zalia's brazen remarks, which she knew were true. She dabbed her eyes sorrowfully with a tissue. "You don't understand, Zalia. You really don't. You're looking at my situation from the other side of the fence, but you're not inside. You're not privy to what goes on under the roof of my home. If I stay with my husband, yes, I admit, there's a strong possibility I could get killed when Dusty loses it one day and things go badly awry. But if I leave him, I'm already dead, and that's a guarantee, because if I dare leave him, Dusty's ego will be so shattered, he'll kill me for daring to leave him in the first place. If you ask my husband to show you the tattoo on his arm, you'll see the level of how obsessed he is with me. He's got a tattoo of me on his arm. He literally thinks he owns me, That's the way he sees me, as a possession, as a thing, not as a person. He's told me himself that if I ever leave him, I'm a dead woman. And I know it's true. I absolutely believe him." Zalia shuddered in horror. "You've really got yourself in a sticky mess here, Sylvia, and you need to get out of it. You really do. You should go to the police and file that restraining order, but I know you won't. So all I want to say to you is, just so you know, I'm always here for you, and I've always got an apartment open to you whenever you need it." "Thanks, Zalia," said Sylvia. "You really are a trooper. I appreciate it." It would seem that despite Sylvia's very best efforts to hide the fact that her husband Dusty was inclined to become violent after a few drinks, it certainly hadn't escaped the townsfolk attention. In the small town where they lived, everybody knew what Dusty Cladessa was like. By all accounts, Dusty had been in trouble with the police over a plethora of times for drunk and disorderly behaviour, and had earned a formidable reputation as one of the less desirable characters you would do well to avoid. It would seem that no one in their right mind would want to rub Dusty Cladessa up the wrong way, for there would be repercussions if you did such a thing. Dusty Cladessa had been recently questioned in regards to the mysterious disappearance of a local man that had gone missing coincidentally a day after Dusty had been threatening to take his life. There had been many witnesses to this unfortunate brawl that had occurred outside a local bar in town, and had not been pretty. The man that Dusty had beaten up to a pulp had left with a notable limp in his leg and a bloody nose, and had thought better of filing any charges against Dusty, fearing any repercussions. The next day his wife had reported him missing. Witnesses had heard Dusty saying, "You better watch your back. Next time I'll bloody kill you." Dusty had now become a person of extreme interest in this police investigation. The brawl had been sparked from a single conversation where one of the patrons had happened to make a derogatory comment. "I mean, who does that?" Dusty had overheard him say to his friend at the bar, as they were enjoying a couple of beers together. "My wife told me the man had his wife's picture inked on his arm, and there's a caption under it that reads, 'She's mine forever.' I didn't believe a word of it myself, until I happened to be standing behind him at the baker's to pick up some sesame bagels. And sure enough, there was his tattoo, larger than life. My bet is that man is as controlling as hell. He could have had something written under his tattoo like, 'Our love forever.' Instead, 'She's mine forever.' And that strikes me as warped." The other man had rubbed his moustache reflectively. "It's not the tattoo that concerns me. That's benign, irrelevant really. It's the wife I feel sorry for. Pretty ethereal thing she is, as delicate as a porcelain doll that could so easily break, which I suspect is the real reason why Dusty Cladessa was attracted to her in the first place, as a bully enjoys breaking up the fragile things in life. I've seen his wife Sylvia around the place from time to time. My bet is he beats the living daylights out of the poor woman. I saw her in here recently. She was nursing a broken wrist. My bet is he pushed her over. Gladys, a friend of mine who works at the tavern where Sylvia waitresses, says she's always claiming to have tripped and fallen over something, or bumped into a door, because she's always got bruises, but everybody knows what really is going on there. I wish that woman would file restraining orders against that man. He wants locking up, he does. Real men don't behave like this." Dusty, on overhearing the conversation, had boldly walked over to the two men. "This looks like a cosy conversation that you're having about me. And I was thinking it was only women who liked to gossip. Seems like I got that wrong," he said sarcastically. "Got nothing better to do with your sad little lives than discuss my relationship with my wife that has got nothing to do with the both of you." He grabbed one of the startled men by the collar, dragging him out of the bar, while everybody watched in abject horror, and someone sagaciously called the police.
I heard you nattering about me in the bar, Dusty had screamed indignantly. And for the record, let's get one thing straight. I don't beat my wife up. If you say so, said the gutsy man. But the bruises on your wife's body tell a different story, Dusty. Do they not? They speak for themselves. The two men had engaged in a punch-up. Don't you ever talk about my wife again. Do you understand? Dusty had shrieked. The man had stood his ground and said, It's not right, bro, what you do to your wife, Sylvia. Everyone knows you beat her up, like you're beating me up now. You do like settling your scores with your fists, don't you, Dusty? It's the only currency that you seem to understand. Dusty had virtually growled at the man and had waved a warning finger at him. If I hear you ever talking about my relationship with Sylvia again, I will tear you apart, limb from limb. Do you understand? You're a walking dead man.
He had left the forlorn, rather beleaguered, beaten-up patron, covered in blood, standing rather bemused on the pavement, staring blankly into space, as if disorientated and confused, while he had wantonly sauntered off in his truck with a thunderous gait, without a single care in the world for what he'd done, and then he'd driven away in his decrepit old battered truck, leaving behind him a trail of dirty smoke. And when the police arrived on the scene, Dusty Cladessa had long gone, but a day later the patron he'd threatened to kill, whom he'd beaten up so badly, leaving him with a limp to his step, a bloody nose, and a slight concussion from a bad bump to the head, had simply vanished into thin air without any explanation, and his wife had reported him missing, and the sheriff, as well as all the townsfolk, did not believe in stunning coincidences like this, and all were absolutely certain that Dusty Cladessa was behind the patron's mysterious vanishing. The police had been sniffing around Dusty like a cadaver dog over a corpse, but they had nothing on him, well, not yet, to make an arrest. But Dusty hated the police with a burning passion and always gave them a wide berth whenever possible, especially after the town sheriff had said to him warningly, I'm watching you, Dusty, and don't you forget that for a moment. Sooner or later you're going to slip up, because I know you have something to do with Wyatt Engelman's disappearance, and I am going to make that arrest sooner or later. Dusty, with an arrogant snigger, had said, You've got nothing on me, Sheriff. But there had been a look between the two men, a look the sheriff had discerned in other guilty men he'd arrested over the years. It was a yes, I did it look, but you'll never catch me look. Dusty had been married to Sylvia for 5 years. At first his wife was having fertility problems during the first few years of their marriage, which had been grievously annoying and frustrating for Dusty, because he had in mind that he'd like a big family, with a plethora of children, but his wife Sylvia seemed incapable of falling pregnant, and one day it had happened, and Dusty could not believe how their luck had changed so fortuitously. He had no way of knowing that his wife Sylvia had secretly been taking birth control pills for years behind his back, clandestinely keeping her stash of pills in a rusty old paint can in the yard shed. If Dusty ever learnt about her duplicity, she knew she was almost certainly dead. But after she'd broken her ankle, after Dusty had knocked her over, it would seem her trips to the yard shed to retrieve her pills had been curtailed, and as a result she had fallen pregnant.
Things will be much better now that I'm about to become a father,
Dusty had told Sylvia, rubbing his hands with glee.
Just you wait and see.
He had taken Sylvia's hand into his large one and given it a tight, affectionate squeeze.
I'll turn over a new leaf, Sylvia. See if I don't. Since Howie has been born, I've become a new man, and I'm taking my responsibilities as a father seriously, and I want to be a very good father to our son, and set a good example to him.
Sylvia glanced briefly at her husband, regretting how she'd fallen for such a handsome man all those years ago. Even though they'd been together for 8 years and married for 5, it felt like an entire lifetime, because the hours in every day seemed to have dragged on forever with Dusty. She was now paying a heavy price tag for being so masterfully seduced by such a good-looking face, like the stunning veneer of a magnificent building that you find was only ever made of plyboard and was really just a flimsy stage set, not made out of anything enduring or substantial. What a complete idiot she had been, the envy of all her school friends, who lived in the quirky town of New Hope, situated on the Delaware River on the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Sylvia thought she had hit the jackpot dating such a perfect-looking man that had made the girls drool over him like maple syrup over a waffle. It had made her feel incredibly proud that the likes of Dusty Cladessa was interested in her. Little did she know, like a lion moving in on its prey, that she was the kind of woman that Dusty Cladessa knew he could control. She was vulnerable, naive, whimsical, trusting, and delicate. In Sylvia's deceived eyes, everything about Dusty Cladessa was perfect. His face was idealistically symmetrical, his hair a natural highlighted mix of blondes and browns, his skin a golden brown colour that perfectly accentuated his cornflower blue eyes that were framed by thick eyelashes. Sylvia, known to her friends as Sylvie, had run away with Dusty when she was only 18 years old, and had always regretted the day she had blown all caution to the wind. The echoes of her parents' warning voices remained in her head, telling her that Dusty Cladessa was bad news indeed. But in her mulishly stubborn denial, she had refused to heed their salient warnings. In those former, seductive, rather romantic years, Dusty Cladessa had artfully persuaded Sylvia, with his silvery tongue and magnanimous kind gestures, that he was the perfect all-American boy, whom would give her a great life, the life she always dreamed of, if they were to run away together and get married, and that she would never want for anything again. Even at a young age, Dusty Cladessa had made a lot of money, fixing up old cars for a living, so he'd built up a sizable amount of money for them to run away with. "Sweetheart," Sylvia's mother had told her, "I know Dusty Cladessa looks like he should be a hunky firefighter on a calendar or something like that. Granted, he's a very handsome young man, he is. I'll give you that. But I want to assure you that not all pretty things are good on the inside, and you would do well to remember that. What do they say? Don't judge the book by its cover. Just because it looks good on the outside does not mean it makes good reading material at all. And more's the pity that you cannot see it for yourself. You're terribly young and naive, sweetheart, with a whole lot to learn about this world of ours. You forget, Sylvia, I was your age at one point in time, believe it or not, and I wasn't always ruled by common sense, I'm afraid to say. So I made some catastrophic mistakes as far as men are concerned, in my time, down the bumpy, tumultuous road of life. And yes, I learnt some hard lessons along the way, until I was fortunate enough to meet your father. And I just don't want you to make the dreadful mistakes I made when I was young." "Mum," said Sylvia, contorting her face in abject disgust, "I'm 18 years old. I'm not 3. Quit treating me as if I'm 3 years old. Dusty is a great boy. He's got so much going for him. He's making lots and lots of money, but you seem determined to hate him by saying all these mean, unkind things about him. I've met the boy of my dreams, and I'd like to think you'd be happy for me. I may be 18, but I think I'm a pretty good judge of character." Her mother had raised a cynical brow. "Do you, dear? I beg to differ, I'm afraid. At your age, I think you're whimsically seeing what you want to see, through rose-coloured spectacles, because you're a natural romantic at heart, and you envisage yourself being swept away by a handsome prince, like in the fairy tales. But I'm here to tell you, sweetheart, that life does not work out like that. I'm going to tell you something that should make your hair curl. Do you remember old Mr. Penbridge?" "What about Mr. Penbridge, Mum? I don't see what he has got to do with Dusty, even though he was Dusty Cladessa's next-door neighbour for a long time. But of course I remember him. I see him around often enough at the local library. He takes out tons of library books. He and his wife are keen readers.
They read every Sunday for the entire day in their living room. Detective novels, I'm told.
Mrs. Jenkins washed her hands in the kitchen sink, drying them with a dishcloth, her blue eyes clouding over with sadness. But she knew she needed to tell her capriciously belligerent teenage daughter, who could be both standoffish, defensive and rebellious at the best of times, like any typical cantankerous teenager, what Mr. Penbridge had revealed to her about Dusty Cladessa. She knew she needed to proceed cautiously, as at 18 years old, Sylvia could become very reactive if you told her something she didn't want to hear. She paused for a brief moment, holding her daughter's steely gaze.
Go on, said Sylvia. I know you're dying to tell me, Mum, so spit it out, why don't you? Well, when I bumped into Mr. Penbridge, he asked after you. He's always had a soft spot for you, Sylvia. His wife says you were one of her favourite pupils at junior high.
Let me guess, said Sylvia, preempting what her mother was going to say.
You're going to tell me that Mr. Penbridge was bad-mouthing Dusty and didn't have anything good to say about my boyfriend. That's pretty predictable. Let's hear it. He's concerned about you, my dear, as are me and your father, with good reason. We don't want you getting mixed up with the likes of Dusty Cladessa. He's an unsavoury character. Mr. Penbridge is not the first person to have told us some less than agreeable, reassuring things about Dusty Cladessa. He was warning us that Dusty is not all he seems at face value. He grew up in a dysfunctional, volatile home, and I'm afraid, like it or not, that influences the stability of a child when he grows up. His father was always beating up on his mother, I believe. I gather she divorced him when Dusty was very small, moving away, leaving Dusty to be raised by his dad. So I do admit that your boyfriend had a tough start in childhood, with his mother out of the picture. But Mr. Penbridge lived right next door to the Cladessa family, and would always hear fighting and arguing. And one occasion there were gunshots going off in that house. Mr. Penbridge called the police, but the Cladessas claimed it was nothing.
That's because his dad was a loser, said Sylvia. Dusty told me all about him. I know all about the arguments they had together. That's why Dusty lives in his own apartment now, and hasn't spoken to his dad in years. When he sees him, he crosses over to the other side of the road. So what you're telling me is old news. Sylvia's mother grimaces when she hears her daughter's nonchalant, insouciant remarks, spoken by a girl who has behind her no life experience whatsoever, rather like a caterpillar on a leaf that knows nothing about life as a butterfly, but focus only on the leaf before him, as that is all he knows. If you told that caterpillar about flying, he'd laugh at you and say,
Me flying? Are you kidding? That could never happen.
Sylvia's naivety is hard for Mrs. Jenkins to swallow. How she wishes her daughter could be more shrewd and discerning. She knows that abused people can often become the abusers later on in life. She bites her lips and wrings out her hands, like the washing, which she does as a self-soothing gesture, to iron away her nerves, as what she has to tell her daughter next won't be easy.
There is more to the story, I'm afraid, Sylvia.
Sylvia makes a face and groans at her mother.
What else did he have to say, Mum? That Dusty's a wizard conjuring up spells or something? Or did he tell you he smokes pot? Go on, let's hear it, she says, clapping her hands sarcastically. There is no need to be sarcastic, Sylvia. You need to hear what I have to say. Then say it, for goodness sake, Mum. Mr. Penbridge caught your boyfriend, Dusty Cladessa, when he was 14 years old or so, trying to drown a bag of over 8 little kittens in the lake, just for fun. Mr. Penbridge was absolutely furious about it. He snatched the bag of kittens away from Dusty, asking him what the hell he was doing. And you know what Dusty said? I was taking them for a swim in the lake, sir, but I wouldn't harm them. He phoned up Dusty's father to tell him about what his son had done, and Dusty's father said, Good job, getting rid of Vernon like that. I never did like cats. It would seem even his own father had no heart for the poor little mites. Mr. Penbridge believed that Dusty was getting a macabre kind of sick satisfaction from making those kittens suffer. Because he's not right in the head, sweetheart. People who treat animals badly are not well. Mr. Penbridge went out of his way to ensure that each kitten found a lovely new home. But he described the vindictive look on Dusty's face as a 14-year-old boy as grievously unsettling for him. You may say, Sylvia dear, that he was young at the time, but that is no excuse to behave like that. Most 14-year-old kids treat animals with respect. If Dusty was capable of doing something so evil, you have to ask yourself, dear, what else is he capable of? I know he's presenting a good face to you, Sylvia, so that you fall passionately in love with him. That's exactly what he wants. But when the two of you get married one day, and he gets comfortable with you, like an old pair of slippers that he wears every day, there is no telling how he might treat you. Think about the way his father treated him. It could turn on you, and it could turn ugly, Sylvia. You really must listen to me.
Mr. Penbridge was lying, said Sylvia. Dusty would never ever do something like that. Dusty's a good person. I don't believe he'd ever harm an animal. You're making this all up to put me off going out with him because you never ever liked him. All you want to do is ruin my life, Mum. It's so typical of you. Why can't you be happy for me?
I would be happy for you, dear, if Dusty was a reliable gentleman. But he's not, dear, and the sooner you realize that, the better. You need to wake up.
Mr. Jenkins, Sylvia's devoted father, whom had been reading the newspaper in the kitchen at the table, folded up the paper into a square and tossed it onto the chair on his left-hand side. He tentatively looked up at his daughter, with kind hazel eyes, wrought with worry that were framed by his tortoiseshell glasses. He removed the glasses pensively from his eyes and folded them up into a leather case, and let out a huge, exasperated sigh.
We are not trying to destroy your happiness, Sylvia. That is the last thing me and your mother want for you. Like any well-meaning parents, we want the very best for you, because we love you. You are our daughter. You are our pride and joy. Me and your mother are trying our level best to be a lighthouse in your life, guiding you away from tempestuous seas and rocky waters. We're not setting out to shipwreck your relationship with Dusty Cloudessa. But what we are doing is warning you to proceed with caution. If Dusty was beaten up by his father, he might end up beating you, because he grew up in that dysfunctional environment, and he saw that as the norm. It's very common for that to happen. We don't want you to end up becoming his punching bag. Think about it long and hard, Sylvia. If Dusty Cloudessa attempted to drown a bag of over 8 kittens in his teens, it shows you that he's likely a narcissistic personality type. Someone who has no compassion. I don't want any daughter of mine getting harpooned by a man like that, because you might not escape his grasp.
Why are you both being so horrible? And you too, Dad, said Sylvia defiantly. You're as bad as Mum, Dad.
You just don't want me to be happy with Dusty. That's why you're making up all these horrible lies about him that are not true. You're making it all up. He'd never ever hurt a kitten. I bet if I ask Dusty about those kittens, he'll say it never happened and that Mr. Penbridge made it all up. I'm sure he would. But why would Mr. Penbridge do that, dear? He wants you to be happy like me and your mother do. He gave your mother a cautionary warning about Dusty Cloudessa because he cares about you.
You and Mum make me sick to the stomach, said Sylvia. Conspiring against me like this, it's disgusting. Trying to break me and Dusty apart. You're cruel, you're mean, you're horrible, and I hate you. Dusty would never hurt a fly. Why are you lying about him? He's so good to me. He buys me flowers, expensive gifts, treats me like a lady. And you're making out he's a monster. I hate you. I hate you. Sylvia had marched out of the room in indignation, only to leave a note for her parents a few days later, telling them she'd gone away with Dusty Claudessa and never wanted to see them again as long as she lived. But now, all these years later, she missed her parents desperately, but was way too proud to pick up the telephone to tell them so. Her parents had been absolutely right about Dusty Claudessa, and so had Mr. Penbridge. Dusty was a chip off the old block, exactly like his own father, and she could imagine him easily trying to drown a bag of 8 kittens, which was why Sylvia, who adored animals, refused to even get her a dog or a cat, as she was quite sure that Dusty would end up killing the creature in a moment of unbridled rage, or to get his revenge on her by teaching her a lesson. Sylvia had sometimes phoned her parents just to hear her dad answer the telephone. Tears would come into her eyes as she heard his voice.
"Hello? Hello, is anybody there?"
She'd hear him say to her mother,
"It's another one of those funny calls, I'm afraid, my dear."
"Oh dear," her mother would say, "you do get some sick people in this world, don't you? Who get their kicks from cranking people, I'm afraid." Sylvia would put down the phone with tears in her eyes. How she missed her lovely life in Philly, in her quaint, prepossessing hometown, where people cared about their neighbours, but there was no going back now. Sylvia would put down the phone with tears in her eyes. How she missed her lovely life in Philly, in her quaint, prepossessing hometown, where people cared about their neighbours, but there was no going back now. Sylvia had heard all about the recent unfortunate incident in the bar, and was convinced that Dusty was behind the disappearance of Wyatt Engelman. She had seen her husband arriving at the house on the day Wyatt had disappeared, looking particularly suspicious, but she had known better than to ask any questions or to dob her husband into the police, because she might find herself buried in a shallow grave, and she knew that she needed to preserve her safety by turning a blind eye to any suspicious behaviour on her husband's part. So it was on this unassuming Thursday morning in July that the couple had walked down the beach together, and to any casual observer they possibly looked like a happy young couple that was madly in love with each other and enjoying the pleasure of becoming new parents. But appearances can be very deceptive, as not everyone is privy to know what goes on behind closed doors. Sylvia had chosen to come to her favourite, rather special beach, that for some reason always appeared to be sequestered at the very best of times, possibly because the ocean currents in these parts had a predisposition to being rather fearsome. Not that many people were mad enough to swim out here, even if sporting a wetsuit, as the water was always obnoxiously cold. The couple spread out a picnic rug lackadaisically across the beach, and began to enjoy eating their turkey and cranberry sandwiches that Sylvia had brought along for their lunch, which she served with grapes, potato chips, and cob salad. It did not surprise her that several hopeful seagulls began hopping towards them eagerly, their beady eyes homing in on the sandwiches, eager to steal away a few crumbs. Sylvia did not have much of an appetite, so she threw most of her sandwich to the seagulls, who fought among themselves for it, one making Sylvia laugh with its sorry expression, when it realised all it had gained was a sorry-looking lettuce leaf. So Sylvia, feeling sympathetic towards its plight, threw it a sandwich, and it flew away, looking as if it had won the lottery. Dusty frowned, unable to see the humour in the situation.
"Greedy birds,"
he tutted under his breath, sounding very annoyed.
"You can't even eat a sandwich around here in peace, without eyes watching you everywhere. You never eat much these days, Sylvia. When we first got together you were voluptuous and curvy all those years ago. You were never as thin as you are now. The seagulls have eaten more than you today, made a better showing than you have. You're as skinny as those catwalk models that look as if they haven't eaten a thing in centuries."
"That's because they haven't," said Sylvia. "My mother knew this woman who was a model once. She said that the lady lived on 1 apple a day for years, and the girls were always throwing up in the toilets to stay as thin as possible. Most of them had bulimia. The designers want to have coat hangers for their clothes, you see, and they like the girls to have no breasts or booties because the clothes don't hang well on people who have too many curves. Their clothes look much better on skinny models, you see."
Well, what is the excuse then with you? You're not exactly an aspiring model, are you? Why don't you eat? No one is measuring your waist.
Sylvia would have liked to have told him the truth, but she knew better than that. She had to protect herself. What she'd like to have said is, I don't eat because it's difficult to have much of an appetite, when every day I live in abject fear, wondering when you're going to lash out at me again. Instead, she shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly and stared out at the ocean longingly and said, I don't know. I guess I just don't have much of an appetite these days. Dusty frowned.
That's no excuse, Sylvia. You should eat. It's not good, nor is it healthy not to. Maybe you should get this investigated by a doctor. Maybe your thyroid is not working right.
There's nothing wrong with my thyroid, Dusty, she assured him. Let's change the subject, shall we? We're here to enjoy ourselves, are we not? Are you going to eat the rest of your sandwich? Because if you're not going to eat it, that hungry seagull over there is watching your every mouthful you're eating and is hoping you'll pass him a few crusts. To Sylvia's surprise, Dusty laughed. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and for a brief moment Sylvia saw the young man that she had fallen in love with all those years ago. He was still strikingly handsome, of that there was no doubt. But unfortunately, Sylvia knew beneath her husband's good looks was a man with a volatile, explosive personality that she did not trust an inch, and any love she once felt for this man had disappeared like the wistful smoke from a chimney. Dusty threw the rest of his sandwich towards the seagull, who dived on it with the nimble dexterity of a bird of prey, and flew away squawking with delight. The couple both laughed, and Dusty reached out to squeeze his wife's hands.
If I didn't know better, said Dusty with a twinkle in the eye, I'd say this having no appetite was an excuse to feed the seagulls. That's what this was all about, was it not? You love to feed the birds.
You've got me, said Sylvia. I confess I love feeding the gulls.
Isn't this wonderful? The view is beautiful today, and the sunshine very pleasant, said Dusty, covering his feet with the sea sand and staring out at the ocean. We're going to have much fun when Howie's big enough to build sand castles in the sand. I can help him make large forts and moats, like I did when I was a boy myself. And we can go searching for shells together. And when he's older, I'd like to teach him how to hunt. There's no greater feeling than taking down a wild animal. Maybe one day when he's older we can go off to India and both kill a tiger together. Imagine, we could have some magnificent pictures to hang on the wall with us standing next to a dead tiger. We could even get the tiger's head treated by a taxidermist. We could hang it on the wall for show. Imagine that.
Sylvia looked disgusted. I can accept you enjoy hunting, Dusty, because some animals in the wild need to be culled, and people need to eat. I get that, but I draw the line at you wanting to kill a tiger. I'm sorry, but that's disgusting. I think it's sick to want to take down an animal like that. I really do. Those creatures are magnificent, and you want to kill one just to show off to people? It's insane. Anyway, if my memory serves me right, I think they're a protected species in India.
Dusty shrugged. I don't expect you to understand, Sylvia. It's a man thing. Look at you. You refuse to even kill a spider, so you're naturally adverse to any blood sports. But you were quite happy to eat the turkey on your sandwich, because it came from the supermarket. But you refused to acknowledge at one time it was a living, breathing thing.
All right, I agree. You make a point, said Sylvia. But even so, no baby of mine is ever going to India to kill a tiger, and that's final. Sylvia stared down at her sleeping baby, her eyes misting over with tears. He's so beautiful, so perfect, isn't he? She said. Mrs. Nichols said I should enjoy Howie while I can. She said only the other day her son was 6 months old, and now she watched him walking down the aisle to marry his wife Susan. She says the time just melted away like butter, and now she's about to be a grandmother. I must admit right now it's hard for me to envisage that in 20 years' time, Howie will be a fully grown man. He is so handsome, is he not?"
"He is, isn't he?" said Dusty proudly. "He's a chip off the old block. Reminds me of myself. He's got my eyes and my chin. When he's older, he's going to break so many female hearts."
"Like you did, you mean?" said Sylvia. "When you were at school, every girl had the hots for you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm.
"I don't like the way you talk about that in the past tense, my love. I'll have you know women are still drooling all over me,"
he said, with a satisfactory smug tone to his voice.
"I mean, can I help it that I'm so good-looking? When I was dating you, I got approached by a modelling agency, you know. They wanted me for a cover shot on one of their male magazines."
Sylvia mumbled under her breath, something about good looks not being everything, but if Dusty heard, he said nothing. Sylvia suspected her husband had cheated on her during their relationship, but she did not care. The more woman who titillated his fancy, the better as far as she was concerned, because it meant the less time she'd have to spend with Dusty herself, and the less chance she had of a fist being flung into her face. She had seen the evidence of Dusty's infidelity in the pockets of his shirts, blazers, and chinos, where bills had been paid for in expensive restaurants for 2 patrons, and she'd also discovered mysterious telephone numbers written on serviettes and lipstick. Her husband left these in his pockets deliberately. He went to great lengths not to hide his indiscretions, and Sylvia suspected that this was because he wanted her to know that other women found him irresistibly attractive, as if he was sending her a clandestine, silent message saying,
"You are very lucky, Sylvia, to have a man like me that every other woman wants."
"They can have you," Sylvia would mutter under her breath. "They are so welcome to have you, Dusty." How Sylvia had longed to run away from Dusty, but she knew if she did, he'd find her and very likely kill her. Dusty's insatiable ego and haughty, swaggering pride could not handle rejection of any kind. That would be too much for him to stomach. Ostensibly, after the recent events with the disappearance of Wyatt Engelman, Sylvia was more afraid than ever of her husband, and was convinced he was capable of murder.
"What are you doing, Sylvie?"
asked Dusty, sounding annoyed, as Sylvia threw off her dress so that it landed on the beach sand in a puddle of material. She began running across the beach, into the water, embracing the waves, wearing only a one-piece pink bathing suit.
"You can't go swimming like that," he called after her. "It's crazy. The water is freezing."
"It's good for you," said Sylvia, laughing coquettishly, behaving in a flirtatious way her husband had not seen in a long time. "They say ice-cold water is great for the health, you know. It's marvellous. It's so invigorating. I bet you're too chicken to come into the water, Dusty." That did it. No one told Dusty he was too chicken for anything, because his ego couldn't take being belittled or patronised. In that moment, needing no further encouragement, Dusty took off his clothes, scanning the beach carefully to see if anybody was watching them. He felt reasonably assured that nobody was around. 5 minutes in the water wouldn't be a problem, he thought. His son Howie was in his Moses basket, fast asleep. Grinning, he ran into the water after his wife. Today she was behaving like she did when they first dated all those years ago, and he liked this new look a lot. Unbeknown to Dusty Cladessa, there was somebody else watching the young couple, frolicking in the water together, and once the Moses basket was abandoned, that woman wasted no time to do what she intended to do. The woman was in her early 20s, and her dark black hair was tied back in a neat pigtail. She'd been waiting patiently for this moment, wondering if it would ever come, and then it did, as if manna had been falling from heaven. She surreptitiously crept to the beach, her heart pounding a dime to a dozen in her chest. She could see the young couple splashing around in the water, and time was of the absolute essence. Right now they seemed so caught up in a lingering kiss, and the man was grabbing the woman in the water as if he didn't want to let her go. The woman ran hurriedly with her bare feet towards the beach, her feet lifting up the warm sand. She could hear the crashing, thunderous sound of the ocean waves as they rolled like charging white horses to the shoreline. She wondered how anyone in their right mind could brave that hostile cold water. She would never attempt to go swimming in conditions like this. The woman with her generously large, oversized floppy hat and dark sunglasses crept up very cautiously to the Moses basket, very worried and afraid she'd be observed and seen. She peered into the basket. For a brief moment she was bedazzled by the sight of the beautiful sleeping baby lying underneath the blanket, and her heart surged with a great love for this tiny little bundle. "Don't you worry, my little one. I'm going to take great care of you. See if I don't." She picked up the Moses basket very gently in her hands and ambitiously scuttled away across the beach, her heart fluttering wildly like a frantic pigeon. She disappeared into the parking bay that overlooked the beach, climbing into her car and staring out towards the beach. The couple was still splashing around rather recklessly in the water, blindly oblivious to what had just transpired only moments before. "I've done it," she told herself proudly. "I've done it. Now I need to get the hell out of here. But I'm pretty sure no one saw me." The young woman turned on the key to the engine, pressed down the accelerator a little too forcefully, so that the car stuttered a little, but nevertheless she managed to drive away as fast as she could, so that only the truck belonging to the couple playing in the water remained in the parking bay. The young couple, seemingly blindly oblivious to what had transpired, came out of the water feeling frozen to the core. Every part of their bodies was tingling with the freezing water, but Dusty had to admit that he felt rather invigorated. The couple hurriedly ran towards their dry towels, and of course their clothes, and dressed as quickly as they could. They were shivering with the cold. It was a warm day, but that was the Oregon coast for you. No matter how hot the weather, the ocean remained resolutely cold, no matter the season. It was only then that Dusty's face paled and went as white as a ghost.
"Where is the Moses basket? Where is our baby?"
Sylvia looked to the empty spot on the beach, tears spilling down her cheeks. She cupped her mouth in astonishment, falling onto the beach on her knees, crying out, "My baby! My baby! Somebody's taken my baby!" She looked at her husband in bewilderment. "Someone has taken Howie! He's gone! Do something! Do something, Dusty!" Dusty, in a panic, went running up and down the beach, calling out for his baby, which was an insane thing for him to do, given the baby could not run on its little legs or even talk. Dusty howled as he cried out. The pain in his voice sounded like that of an injured animal, as his worst fears were confirmed. His baby was gone and was nowhere to be found, and Dusty blamed the child's disappearance on his wife. Some things never did change.
"This is your fault, Sylvia. You were the one that got this crazy idea for us to go swimming in the freezing cold water of the ocean. And now, thanks to you, our baby has been abducted. I'll never forgive you for this," he had growled furiously at her. Dusty had been appalled by the sheriff's insouciance towards the abduction of his child. He'd have thought the police would have taken a graver view towards the disappearance of his baby, and done their utmost to find the whereabouts of his child. But instead the officers at the station lackadaisically took down his details, and said they would look into the matter. Should not his baby's disappearance be broadcast over the airwaves and be front-page news in the papers? But instead the police were about as useful as a bunch of lagerlouts on a beach vacation who fancied parking themselves on the beach all day and not moving a muscle. Dusty was not remotely happy about the sheriff's attitude, but then again the sheriff had never had any time for him, and had made no secret of it either. He wasn't going through the protocol of asking him the right questions about his missing baby, and had only taken down a handful of notes. "It's because the sheriff thinks I killed Wyatt Engelman," he thought to himself. "If it was anybody else's baby that had gone missing, he'd treat the case very differently. But because it's my baby, he couldn't give a damn." The sheriff had nodded apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Cladessa. This must be a very difficult time for you. But we'll do our level best to try and locate your missing baby." "What's wrong with you, Sheriff?" Dusty had growled indignantly. "You were all over me like a hot rash when Wyatt disappeared, and were quick to blame me for his vanishing. But now my baby boy has gone missing, and you do nothing at all. And even the press only put a scant article in the back of the paper. Don't you care that my baby boy has gone missing?" "Of course we care, Mr. Cladessa. I assure you we're doing our best to locate your missing child. But I assure you when a baby is abducted and goes missing, it is not always easily recovered. You need to prepare yourself for that. We will do our job to the best of our ability. Of course we will. But you need to prepare for the very worst. You know what, Sheriff? You're bloody useless, the whole bunch of you are. I doubt you'd even find something if it was staring you in the face." Dusty Cladessa left the police station in a very angry mood. He had a profound sense that something was seriously off. Even his wife's behaviour was strange. She was devastated that her baby was gone, and was perpetually crying, but she didn't seem to be making any effort to try and locate their baby. "The police are doing their very best, Dusty," she assured him. "They're doing all they can in the circumstances." But Dusty was convinced that he had seen the sheriff suppressing a triumphant smile, as if he was thoroughly enjoying Dusty's distress. He suspected Dusty was involved in Wyatt's disappearance, and was obviously looking on his baby's disappearance as some kind of karmic payback. No one was taking Dusty remotely seriously, and it was making him as mad as a caged tiger. "What is wrong with people? Our child has been abducted," said Dusty to Sylvia. "You say the police are doing their best. Who are you kidding? They're doing nothing at all. They're all useless. Our story has not even been front-page news. We just get a tiny write-up in the back of the paper. It's pathetic. I've seen other kids going missing, and they've got much more airtime than we ever did." Dusty lashed out at his wife several times after Howie was gone, but he couldn't help himself. His wife was beginning to irritate him as much as the good-for-nothing authorities had. Nothing made him more infuriated when he returned home one day from his job in town to find that Sylvia, his wife, had gone. She'd left a message for him. "I needed to get away for a few days. We'll be back soon. Don't worry about me. With the stuff that's been going on recently, I just needed some space, that's all. Please don't be mad. Love, Sylvia." "Please don't be mad. Was his wife kidding?"
Dusty's blood was boiling over.
"How dare she walk out on him like this, especially at such a catastrophic time in his life, when the roof was folding in on them? How could his wife be so damn selfish? Did she really think she was alone in her grief about the enigmatic disappearance of their baby boy Howie? Wait until he got his hands on his wife. She'd regret the day she had chosen to walk out on him. If Sylvia was here right now, he'd love nothing better than to strangle her to death. She needed to pay for leaving him in the lurch like this, and the police had done nothing to help him locate his son. At this moment in time, he'd happily strangle the lot of them."
18 years later, Todd's account. After having gone through a divorce with my wife in Kansas, which is situated in the Midwestern part of the United States, with Topeka as its state capital and Wichita its largest city, I came from a small pretty town of Cottonwool Falls, with a small populace, situated among the rolling hills of Chase County. I moved down to the Oregon coast to get away from my connections to the past. My marital breakup had been a messy affair, and I figured moving down to the coast would be a clean break for me. There is nothing worse in this world than bumping into your ex wherever you go, and in a small town where everybody knows your business, it was bound to happen. I already knew our marital breakup had been the topic of great gossip by the town busybody, Frida Montesa, who was rapidly spreading around wild rumours that I was a good-for-nothing, unfaithful spouse who'd been having dozens of affairs behind my wife's back, and nothing could have been further from the truth. And the worst part of it all is that people believed her claims, and these are people who'd known me all my life. I got quite a few nasty sideways glances from affronted people in town, one or two of them who said to me quite brazenly, "Shame on you, Todd." But I decided to walk away from their unkind insinuations, as what is the point of correcting anyone who's already made up their mind about you? In truth, at my age, in my early 60s, I didn't give a damn what other people thought of me. There was a time, as a young man, I'd have found such allegations wounding, but age has a way of smoothing down the rough edges in life and making you not take things too personally, which is the greatest gift of getting old. If the truth be told, it was my wife who had an affair with a personal trainer who was helping her to shed the last 20 pounds she'd been struggling to get rid of for years, which she blamed from all her pregnancies with our 3 children. The personal trainer was young enough to be my son, and that was something impossible to get my head around, and my children did not take the revelations kindly, as my son Chase had been at school with the young man in question, and was absolutely revolted that a friend in his own year had been having an affair with my wife. I think the young man fancied older women, and made no secret of this fact. I suspect my wife was still seeing him. My wife told me I was never around for her, never gave her enough attention. You know, the usual story. I tried to fix the problems in our marriage, but the damage had been done. And I found I couldn't feel quite the same way about my wife again. Her betrayal hit me hard. We tried counselling and everything, but nothing worked, as once the trust is eroded, there's not much you can do to salvage a dilapidated relationship that has been left in ruins. It's like trying to fix a cracked, broken pipe. Any plumber is going to say you need to throw away the old and begin again. I was trying to move on with my life, and to me the sensible course of action was to move away, about 27 hours by car, from the quaint rolling hills of my hometown to the Oregon coast, that had stolen my fancy from a young age. My children were now grown up and had left home, and they were living in what in its heyday was considered the wild frontier town of Dodge County, with a populace of about 28,000 people, which meant at the very least they were living in a town where not everybody knew their name or their business. I thought early retirement by the coast would be a good start for me, and I had always loved Oregon. I was to discover a beautiful old house that had been superbly renovated on the Oregon coast, that was a perfect size for me. It was not too big for a single divorcee embarking on a peaceful life. At one time the residence had been a large residential home, but it was now divided into 2 properties with 2 separate front doors. But regretfully the wall between both houses was paper thin, so it was easy to hear my next-door neighbour's television blaring away, as if I was living in an apartment block. In truth, it was a small price to pay to enjoy the prepossessing views over the Yachats coastline. It really was idyllic, and even the estate agent told me I had found a sought-after property that was one of a kind, especially for people wishing to live in a house that was not too large by the coast. I understood from the real estate agents that the house had been divided up by a marital couple who had got divorced but still wanted to be involved in their children's lives on a daily basis, so they subsequently divided the house into 2 separate residences so that they could live in close proximity to each other, but live separate lives at the same time, and be in a position to watch over their children. This fabulous house was nestled on a rocky outcrop that overlooked some rugged wild coastline and a plethora of lofty trees, along with a short ribbon of beach. The enchanting house was perfectly symmetrical, resembling a life-size children's doll's house, with blue shutters and a grey slate roof, along with generous-sized windows. It would seem the beach was not owned by the property, but by the state. The stretch of coastline was like a cul-de-sac, so no one trespassed on that beach, as many falsely assumed the beach with its surrounding woodland oasis was under private ownership, but they would have been wrong in their presumptions over that. I saw this lonely beach as being a great advantage to me, as who doesn't appreciate enjoying a beach all to yourself? My next-door neighbour, Dusty Cladessa, who lived behind a yellow front door, jointly shared this property with me, which included the front and backyard, along with some abandoned outbuildings that were only ever used for the storage of firewood and yard stuff like paints and gardening tools. Dusty Claudessa appeared terribly friendly and amenable towards me, and I thought on first impressions that I really liked this man, and boy did he have a story to tell. He promptly informed me that his child had been snatched from a beach as a baby of only 6 months of age over 18 long years ago, and his wife Sylvia was overwrought with grief that she left him a note and never returned to her home again. He had tried desperately to search for her with the help of a private detective, but she had left behind her no paper trail, and much like his 6-month baby, appeared to have vanished into thin air. I could not imagine what it must have been like to have lost a wife and a child, and in the grand scheme of things it made my marital breakdown seem minuscule by contrast, and I felt desperately sorry for the man. I had not intended to spend my retirement on my own, but by the looks of things Dusty Claudessa had been alone for the last 18 years. So who was I to complain about my own misfortunes? I realized I had found a kindred spirit in Dusty Claudessa, someone who, much like myself, had been subjected to some of life's cruel blows, and subsequently spent a lot of time in his own company. He told me he had tried his utmost to find his missing boy, and was putting his hope in a DNA data bank, where he'd placed his DNA profile along with that of his estranged wife.
"I'm hoping," he told me, "that my son will enter his details, and when I get a match and find out who is responsible for abducting my child all those years ago, I will kill them. Whoever stole him from that beach."
I knew why he felt that way. I would surely feel a similar way if someone were to abduct one of my children. Dusty went on to tell me how the police had failed him in being able to locate his child. I reassured him that missing children and people were a global international problem, and that thousands of kids vanished every year from America. I was sure that the police had done their level best in the circumstances to try and locate his child. He didn't seem convinced.
"If I find that wife of mine, I'll kill her," he said. "She bogged off into the sunset, leaving me to deal with my own grief and melancholia. She told me she was coming back, but she never did. She lied through her teeth. She always was a cunning one. She knew what she was doing. But she's cleverly been living under the radar, so I can't find her anywhere. It's a bummer. It keeps me awake at night, you know. I've even punched holes in my wall. I've got so mad about the whole wretched business." "Well, I wouldn't be too hard on her if I were you," I said to him gingerly. "I remember reading somewhere, you know, that couples who've had a child abducted don't often stay together." It was then that Dusty rolled up his sleeve to show me the tattoo he had of his wife inked on his arm, which I found a tad unsettling, especially with the unfortunate caption that suggested he owned his wife, like you might own a boat, a yacht, or a house. But I persuaded myself that he was young when he had the tattoo done, and had been so hopelessly in love with this lady called Sylvia, he hadn't really thought about things properly. I was to discover when he invited me to his home for a drink, and en route to the toilet I lost my way, and inadvertently stumbled into his office, to discover he had tons of pictures of his wife pinned all over the walls, which I did think was a tad obsessive. But given what the poor man had been through, I decided to make allowances for him. I mean, who was I to judge him? His life had been a roller coaster of misfortune, being flung from one disaster to another. I had made my own mistakes in life. If I had been a devoted, more diligent husband, and had not taken my wife for granted, maybe she'd not have strayed like a cat on the search for a better home. My wife had needed much more attention that I'd failed to give her. I could see time had not been kind to Dusty Claudessa. When I saw pictures of the man, when he was younger, in his prime, he looked like the type that would break many a woman's heart, as he had what I would say, in his photographs, a Brad Pitt kind of look about him, and I dare say he was even better looking than Brad Pitt in his day. Now, even though he was in his early 50s, I thought he looked older than I did. But grief and a hard life can take a grievous toll on the best of us,
These days Dusty Claudessa had hair that was as white as a lily, and a road map of wrinkles all over a leathery skin that looked weathered and worn out by the sun. And he had a huge gut that extended over his pants that I expected he'd gain drowning his sorrows by drinking way too much beer. I think he was beyond caring about his appearance anymore, which I thought was rather sad, because if he had taken better care of himself physically, I was in no doubt he'd still be quite a handsome man. I think the two of us being in a similar boat, with not many friends around, it was natural for us to hang around together for the weekends. It was on a very enjoyable Saturday evening that we decided to hang out together on the beach by making a sumptuous fire pit where we could cook some hot dogs and knock back a few beers together. It was such a pleasure sitting on the beach, with the sand comfortably chafing against my feet, listening to the pleasant, crashing, rhythmic sound of the ocean, while enjoying the tranquilizing benefits of a pleasant night, with a silvery moon casting its ethereal shadows over the water, so the ocean shimmered and gleamed with a gossamer glaze. I was enjoying watching the flames from our fire pit spiritedly dance over the wood, and listen to the crackle and pop that the spitting fire made, as well as enjoying the smoking smell of the hot dogs, drenched in tomato sauce and mustard, that we were cooking. We tucked into them with gusto, very hungrily, and there is nothing better than eating al fresco, listening to the backdrop of the ocean waves crashing against the shore, and staring up at the velvety firmament, studded with rhinestone jewels. I think we were getting slightly inebriated on the beach together, when I got the profound sense that we were not alone. I looked towards the large cluster of trees, and I knew that something was in those trees watching us, and in truth it sent a shivering chill down my spine, as if someone had poured icy water down my shirt. I told Dusty, "I think we're being watched," and he hooted with laughter at that suggestion, as if he thought my preposterous comments were hilariously funny. "I'm being deadly serious. Don't laugh at me. Something is watching us in those trees over there, and I don't feel good about it. Whatever it is, it's huge." I know I had seen a substantial shadow, and I was sure it was watching us. Dusty began to chuckle. "I think the only thing watching us around here, bro, are the crustaceans," he said, as we saw a few large crabs scuttling along the beach. "I wouldn't worry, bro. It's probably a trick of the light, that's all. I used to go coon hunting when I was a young man. It would be dark like this, you know. I was perpetually getting freaked out. Believe me, the mind can play some serious cruel tricks on you. Those dark, ambiguous shadows are like clouds in the sky, you know. You can see things that aren't actually there." "I'm not imagining this," I told him emphatically. "Something is watching us. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. I don't get nervous easily, Dusty, but something's not right. I can feel it in my bones." I showed him the hairs on the back of my arms that were standing on end. That did very little to impress Dusty Claudessa. "There," I said, pointing to the tree suddenly. "I've seen it again, over there. Can you not see it? I know something's there." And sure enough, there was a dark shadow, loitering behind the trees rather ambiguously, and it was clandestinely watching us, and I knew it was. I saw a flash of yellow eyes shine at us at about 8 feet off the ground. "What do you think it was, Dusty?" I asked him. "Let's go and have a look then, shall we?" said Dusty, slurring his words. "No harm in checking it out, is there? If there is a mystery that needs solving, Dusty Claudessa will get to the bottom of it. You mark my words." I wasn't sure that Dusty was going to get very far in his inebriated state, but I followed him soberly across the beach, as he wobbled precariously on his legs like a rocking chair, as we ambled towards the grove of trees. I don't mind admitting I did not particularly like the thought of confronting the danger lurking in those trees that were clustered so tightly together in congenial groups, like a large body of people at a football stadium, only the woodgrove did not possess that animated, pleasing ambience. Instead, it felt airily inauspicious, and as unwelcoming as a dental surgery on a day when you were having all your teeth extracted. I remember entering those woods, overcome with a dreadful sense of foreboding that I could not shake off, and a doomful feeling of impending dread. And like a snake detecting its prey, I could feel and sense danger in our midst. The ominous, mischievous shadows toyed with us teasingly, and drained the grove of any prisms of light, so that everything was clouded in obscurity, and forms as innocent as they may have been, in the dense, monotonous, hostile darkness, looked hideously distorted and crooked, like something out of a funhouse mirror. I was more inclined to run away from the woodgrove like a frightened little rabbit, but Dusty Claudessa had other ideas for us. He was a confrontational type of person, not easily spooked by very much, who did not run away from challenges, but embraced them head-on, like a cantankerous bull, charging towards a matador's red flag, giving no heed, not even a fleeting thought, for the danger he might be in, and viewing our walk through the woods as more like a delightful game. How I wished I had not shared with him my gut feeling of our being watched, as being here in the woods made my heart hammer like a woodpecker's beak. I knew unequivocally that Dusty was the kind of man that could potentially have been the big bully at school that everybody was terrified of. So I realized if I challenged our friendship, he'd spit me out with contempt and ridicule me for being such a flake. At this stage of the game, my heart was doing flip-flops, and my mind was a gymnasium of thoughts I did not want to entertain. I knew that whatever had been scrutinizing us on the beach had artfully wrapped itself in the tenebrific dark shadows, watching us cunningly, and whatever it was, it felt predatory, it felt dangerous. I could feel eyes burning into the back of my skull, and a sizable, formidable presence. The only way I can describe it to you is entering an enclosure with a dangerous animal at the zoo that has the potential to tear you apart limb from limb and kill you. You are going to proceed with caution as you enter that cage, are you not? As every warning instinct in your body enlightens you to be vigilant and on your guard, because you can smell and taste that danger, even if you don't see it at once. You know one wrong move, and you could end up as a steak dinner for that predator. I hasten to say every step I took cautiously into the grove was tentative, but I knew persuading Dusty that this was not a good idea would not be wise on my part, for this man was resolutely determined to find out what I had seen. In truth, I would rather have remained blissfully ignorant. Maybe he did believe I had seen something, for he became fixated as he scanned the trees, using the bright light of his torch to penetrate the footpath, and I could swear he became excited. "There is something here," he agreed with me, "and we're going to find it. And I think I know what you saw." All of a sudden, Dusty Claudessa picked up a piece of timber and began knocking one of the trees. He knocked the tree limb 5 times, and then, sure enough, a moment later we heard 5 responding wood knocks. "What the hell?" I said. "There is something there. Whoever or whatever they are, they copied your wood knocks. This is not good." Dusty looked reasonably satisfied and knocked on the tree again. 5 more knocks, and once again we heard 5 knocks returning to us, followed by a loud, very scary howling sound, or a scream of some kind that sent chills spasming through my body like crackling fireworks. "We've got to get out of here," I told Dusty. "We need to leave the woodgrove now. There's something in the woods. It doesn't want us here. And whatever it is, it's big. I can feel it." "Don't be such a wuss," said Dusty, looking at me in disgust, as if he thought I was behaving like a terrified toddler that had stood on a snail and was making a big deal over it. I suddenly felt very foolish. The last thing I wanted was my new friend to think that I lacked guts. So we continued walking through the trees, and Dusty was wearing a gormless grin on his face, like one of those monotonous caricature clowns you see in the horror movies, and the maniacal contorted look he gave me creeped me the hell out. In that moment I think I was more afraid of Dusty Clarissa than the strange screams we had heard in the woods. And that was when we saw it, blocking our path. It stood there with tree-trunk-sized legs, stretched out before us like the Berlin Wall, as if barricading our path, so that we couldn't go any further, even if we wanted to. The creature's thick hands were holding the branches of a tree. It towered above us at about 9 foot tall, with powerful overlong arms, and a robust, indestructible body, covered with long, flowing, dark hair. I realized in a heartbeat that we were staring at a sizable Bigfoot, and there are no words to describe to you what it is like to come face to face with something you never believed existed in your reality, but in the script of children's novels. Something that has the power to literally snap you in half like a pretzel without even blinking an eyelash. I have never in my life felt such foreboding fear, and a warm trail of urine spilled down my legs. I wet myself, for I was so crippled with terror that my bladder just opened like the floodgates of a large river. I stood there in horror, unable to believe what I was seeing, feeling now certain I had drunk too much, because this just could not be happening. This could not be real. I must be so drunk that I was seeing things that weren't there. But I realized that my wishful, far-fetched thinking was being brutally severed by the truth. This all-male Bigfoot was real. I was certain he was going to kill us, as he seemed so angry, and his furious eyes burned with indignation, but they ignored me and were focused intently on Dusty Clarissa. The Bigfoot's face was so remarkably human, it took me aback. He had grey, leathery skin, dark, hooded eyes, a protruding, heavily wrinkled forehead, high cheekbones, and rather a squat, flat nose. I was able to see him clearly in the light of Dusty's torch, and the generous moonlight that spilled through an open area in the forest canopy. I remember turning to look at Dusty as the creature's furious, challenging gaze continued to look directly at him. I was crumbling at the knees with trepidation, my legs feeling like large concrete blocks that were cracking beneath me. But Dusty was heedlessly aggressive and impetuously challenging towards this male Bigfoot, like a small, rather irritating toy poodle at the doggy park, engaged in a standoff with a bull mastiff. I couldn't believe Dusty was being so cockily arrogant, so carelessly irresponsible like this, provoking this Bigfoot to even more anger and exposing us to grave danger. You didn't challenge a dauntingly powerful creature like this that could so easily snap off your head in a second. But Dusty was flippantly staring at him straight in the eyes, as if not remotely intimidated, and that was when I realized that Dusty Clarissa was not completely normal. Surely even his alcoholic intoxication would not soften the blows of the Bigfoot we were staring at us, who was so terrifyingly intimidating. I was literally gasping in terror. I mean, I know of no other man that could behave this recklessly and be so mindlessly incautious. The Bigfoot stood there like a statuesque, tall, lofty tree, and there was madness in his dark eyes. He pulled back his lips to expose his large human teeth and growled directly at Dusty. And what Dusty did next was infuriating. He picked up a stone and threw it at the Bigfoot, as if to make a statement. "No, I'm not afraid of you." What was wrong with the man? Did he have a death wish or something? Did he want our bodies to be ripped apart, hanging over the trees and strips of meat for the coyotes to enjoy? Because he was certainly going the right way about it. The stone did not do any damage to the Bigfoot, but it provoked him to an insatiable rage, and he let out a furious roar. And in that moment, my life flashed before me. Then I saw Dusty becoming fearful, as if suddenly his overly confident arrogance had been beaten to a pulp, and he had suddenly become conspicuously aware that this time he'd gone too far and had bitten off more than he could chew. Dusty screamed at me, "Run! He's going to kill us!" And I jerked into some kind of slow reaction, like an old battered toy, sputtering back to life. My legs were just so heavy beneath me. I tried so hard to run through the trees, my breath fast and furious, my body heaving and groaning as if it weighed 1/2 ton. I felt the Bigfoot brush past me, pushing me gently to one side out of his way, as he charged after my friend. And I was certain that Dusty Claudessa was dead. But I found him on the beach, after I made my way through the woods, cursing under his breath. Thankfully, the Bigfoot was gone. "What happened?" I said, running towards him. My breath was raspy and fast. I can't believe you're alive. I got the hell of a scare back there. I thought that Bigfoot was going to kill you. I can't believe you're still alive." "You want to know what bloody happened, do you? That Bigfoot grabbed me. He threw me across the beach sand. And then he ran back into the woods." I sighed with relief. "Well, at least he didn't hurt you. I mean, you did provoke him to anger when you threw that stone at him. Why would you do a thing like that? It was a dangerous thing to do." "I was showing him that he didn't scare me. I'm telling you something. I'm going to get that bloody Bigfoot. See if I don't. Shoot him in the head. Take him down myself. No one belittles me like this. With the greatest of respect, Dusty, and I mean this with the greatest of respect, I think you're overreacting. If that Bigfoot had wanted you dead, he could have killed you in a second, crushing you like we could crush a small snail hiding out in the cabbages. But he didn't, did he? Doesn't that at least say something? I think you should leave him well alone. If you went after him with a gun, you might make him as mad as a hatter, and I don't fancy your chances against him. I really don't." "You don't fancy my chances against him?" scoffed Dusty. "That's rich coming from you, Todd. What are you saying? That I'm not a good shot?" "I'm not saying anything of the kind, Dusty. Don't twist my words. I have no idea how good you are with a rifle. Don't take it personally. I'm just saying that very formidable Bigfoot is like a bulletproof army vehicle. He's gargantuan in size, massive. Even if you took a shot at him, you might not successfully kill him. And then if you attempt to kill him, I think you will be the one that he's sorry. You don't know what you're talking about, Todd. You haven't had any hunting experience, clearly. No, I admit I have not. There you go. You've answered your own question. I'll take down that Bigfoot without any problems. I'm a proficient hunter. I know what I'm doing. And believe me this, Todd, I'm going to get him. And I'm going to take him down." "But why? Why do you want to kill him, Dusty? That's insane. What has he done to you, apart from throwing you out onto the sand? And I can't blame him for doing that. You were challenging him in the woods. No wonder he was pissed." Dusty looked at me incredulously, as if I was speaking a foreign language to him, or he thought I was a simpleton of note. "Why? Why do I want to kill him? You ask me such a question? Are you kidding me? That Bigfoot threw me onto the beach, so I fell over and went sliding back. He spoke to me in my head and said, 'Don't you dare do that again, or I'll kill you next time.' He bloody threatened me, Todd. No one threatens me. No one treats me like that. And when we entered the woodgrove, he barricaded our path, as if to say we had no right being there. This is our land, Todd. We live on this property together. This Bigfoot is imposing a threat to us. We need to take him down. He threatened me, Todd. Does that mean nothing to you?" I did think that Dusty was overreacting and was a wee bit loopy in the head, to suggest that the Bigfoot had somehow managed to communicate with him. But I certainly did not blame that Bigfoot for being mad with Dusty, for throwing a stone at him. The Bigfoot had brushed past me in the grove, gently pushed me away to get to Dusty, to get his message across to him. If that Bigfoot had wanted to kill me, I was putty in his hands, but he did not. But it would seem Dusty was being obstinate, and assured me that he would stop at nothing to kill the Bigfoot, and I knew persuading him to think differently was not going to happen. But in truth I did not fancy his chances against the Bigfoot, I knew that even with a high-powered rifle, Dusty would never manage to take the creature down. If anyone would end up dead, it would likely be Dusty, and I was concerned about his safety, but I gritted my teeth and chose not to mention the matter again. I was enjoying a quiet evening meal in my house, pâté and toast, with a bowl of soup, the following evening, when Dusty began banging on my door. And given the events of the previous evening, he was the last person I actually wanted to see. I had privately decided to give him a wide berth, as I sensed he was the kind of man that invited trouble wherever he went, and I wanted no part of it. But Dusty Cladessa would not take rejection kindly. I needed to handle this friendship with care, like a set of crystal glasses that could so easily break, and some of those glass shards are treacherously dangerous and can cut through bone, marrow, and sinew without apology. In many ways, Dusty imposed a greater threat than the Bigfoot in the grove, as he seemed rather unhinged and unbalanced. When I opened the door, he came waltzing into the house, breathing furiously, his face red with excitement, his whole body quivering like a jelly. In that moment, I wondered if he had actually managed to kill the Bigfoot. Maybe I had underestimated his hunting prowess. I'd never have imagined it possible for one man to take down such a titanic creature. But then again, poachers manage to kill rhinoceroses and elephants, don't they? "It worked," he said, throwing his fists in the air in delight. "It bloody worked! I told you it would work." My face dropped, and for a second I genuinely felt crestfallen. I was surprised that I wasn't happy, that he must have killed the Bigfoot. "So you killed the Bigfoot?" I asked him. Dusty shook his head so hard, slapping me on the back. "No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my DNA profile on the databank. I've been matched. My son got in contact with me. We're talking together. Can you bloody believe it?" I stared at Dusty with eyes as wide as saucers. "You're kidding? Your son that was abducted from that beach years ago is in contact with you? Does he even know he was abducted?" "He didn't even know he'd been adopted. Can you believe that? We've been in touch. He begged me not to go to the authorities about his parents. He says they've given him a good life. He wants to meet me. Can you believe it? I'm going to be reunited with my son after all these years, when I'd almost given up hope. It is such good news." "I don't know what to say. That's incredible, Dusty. Really incredible. I'm so happy for you. If your son didn't know he was adopted, why on earth was he on a DNA database? I don't understand. It was a school project or something that they were doing. So he entered his details nonchalantly. Didn't expect any response. And when he heard from the results that I was 99% likely to be his father, he was sure there was a mistake. His parents don't even know that he knows their dirty little secret that they've been keeping from him for all these years. Can you believe it? If he doesn't want you to go to the police, Dusty, about his parents, if you want my advice, I would respect his wishes. That poor young man has to come to terms with the fact that not only was he adopted by people that he believed were his real parents, but these same people he loved and respected all these years abducted him from a beach when he was only 6 months old. It will be devastating for him, but despite everything, he loves them. So if you are being responsible, don't get them arrested for what they've done. It could backfire against you greatly. He could end up hating you for what you do. I recently read an article about something like that in a paper. An abducted child choosing her abductors over her real parents. So you need to bear this in mind. You need to tread very carefully, Dusty." "Don't you worry, bro," said Dusty, slapping me on the back. "I am not an idiot. I shall not be involving the police under any circumstances. They're bloody useless anyway. Administering justice, they don't even know the meaning of it. But believe me, those parents will pay for what they have done." Dusty's ominous threats scared me, because I knew he was a man likely to take the law in his own hands. But I knew I didn't want to get embroiled with a situation that by all accounts seemed more than a little messy. Dusty was so thrilled to be in contact with his son. He looked like a cat that had got the cream, and his thoughts of going after the Bigfoot had subsided. I had since learned that his son had visited him at the house, and they were developing a relationship, and I was so pleased that Dusty was now reunited with his long-lost son. I tried to envisage how I would personally feel if my own child had been abducted from a beach, and then a DNA profile on a databank had brought us together years later against all the odds. One evening Dusty asked me if I'd like to join him on the beach for a barbecue and meet his beloved son, and how could I refuse such an invitation? I was curious and intrigued about meeting this mysterious young gentleman, and wanted to learn all about him. When I arrived on the beach, Dusty had a fire crackling merrily away in a fire pit. It was a beautiful, prepossessing night. The weather was lovely and warm, and we were barbecuing some marinated chicken pieces and burgers over a smouldering fire, and the aromatic, smoky smells of the meat wafted across the whole beach. Dusty's child had been called Howard, and was shortened to Howie, but his real name was Lincoln Astor, and he was a very well-mannered young man, who studied me rather nervously as I came over to meet him. "This is my next-door neighbour, son," said Dusty. "We're very good friends. He lives in another part of the house, behind the electric blue door. As you know, I live behind the yellow door." "You live in an amazing place," said Lincoln appreciatively. "It's so cool to have a beach all to yourself like this. I understand from my father that you encountered a Bigfoot in those woods over there, and that he tried to kill my father. Dusty brought a rifle on the beach. He says he wants to shoot the creature." I stared at Dusty incredulously. Talk about exaggeration. "The Bigfoot didn't try to kill him exactly," I said, trying to set the record straight. "Look, it wasn't exactly like that. We were on the beach together, as we all are now. I sensed something was watching us from those woods over there," I said, pointing to the trees. "And when we went into the woods, we encountered a Bigfoot. Granted, it was a terrifying experience. It was huge, so intimidating. I wet my pants quite literally, something I haven't done since I was a little boy. But this Bigfoot was so powerful. It could easily have snapped our necks without any problem. It was blocking our path. Dusty here bravely threw a stone at the Bigfoot, which I personally did not think was a good thing to do, because it provoked the creature to anger. He pushed past me abruptly, ran after Dusty, throwing him onto the beach sand. But he didn't kill either of us, and believe me, if he had wanted to, it would have been nothing for him to do." Lincoln stared at Dusty incredulously and said, "But I thought you said—" "Well, he didn't kill me. He threw me onto the beach," said Dusty. "But next time, he said he would kill me in my head. I know it sounds strange and bizarre, but it certainly happened like that. Some kind of telepathic exchange. If that story is true, then you must not harm the Bigfoot," said Lincoln soberly. "He was warning you not to mess with him, or you'd be sorry. You'd be wise to put your rifle away. I mean, I don't blame him for running after you, if you threw a stone at him," he told his father. "You were challenging him. He could have killed you, but he didn't. Todd is right. Just leave him well alone, or if you ask me, you will regret it. I've heard about Bigfoots. They're clever, you know. You don't want to rub them up the wrong way. Maybe he was blocking your path for very good reason, possibly even protecting you from something. Just because the creature's scary doesn't make him bad. Half the time these creatures get a bad rap. People misunderstand them, assume the worst. But you might be horribly wrong in your impressions that you have of the creature. I would be careful if I were you. I wouldn't do anything stupid." Dusty didn't look desperately amused at me for showing him off in front of his son, but I knew if anyone could make Dusty see reason, it would be his long-lost son, and it seemed to be working.
He scoffed. "I hardly think the Bigfoot was protecting us. I think he wanted us out of the woodgrove. He was trying to assert his authority over the place. And this is our property." "Even if he was," said Lincoln, "don't mess with him. I don't want you to upset him. You could end up badly off if you did, and I'd like to get to know you better." "How do you feel about your parents, Lincoln?" I asked him, "knowing that you were abducted all those years ago from that beach, and that your parents are not your own. I hope you don't mind me asking such an impertinent question. It's none of my business if you don't want to answer it, of course." Lincoln frowned. "It's all very strange. I can't make any sense of it. My parents are good people, you see, Todd. I come from a loving home. I've never wanted for anything. My parents are law-abiding citizens, and they've loved me unconditionally. I can't believe they would do a thing like this. I only found one article that Dusty sent me, mentioning me as an abducted child on that beach. It didn't even make front-page news at the time." "It's disgusting," agreed Dusty. "I made a huge commotion at the police station, but they didn't seem to care a jot that you'd been abducted from a beach. They said they were doing their level best to find you, but my foot, they didn't even lift a finger. It was dreadful, absolutely dreadful." "It is more than a little odd," I agreed. We sat on the beach all evening, staring out at the ocean, listening to the crashing of the waves, enjoying the soft moonlight that spilled all over the beach, and enjoying the flames of the crackling fire as we roasted marshmallows. I could see Dusty had his high-powered rifle by his side, and I knew if he thought the Bigfoot was around, he would not hesitate, despite our warnings, to unload his barrel in the creature and fire after him in a blaze of bullets. And I hasten to say, as this blissfully beautiful evening progressed, I sensed the feeling that I had perceived on the beach the time before, and I knew that the Bigfoot was watching us. Lincoln sensed it too, and was exchanging private glances at me. I think he realized that his father was hell-bent on the idea of killing the Bigfoot. The good news is that Dusty was 2 sheets to the wind, and he probably would not have noticed a pink flamingo if it was flapping its wings under the soft shadows of a full moon. So I knew that the Bigfoot watching us from the trees was likely safe for the time being, and I was certain I had seen a pair of yellow eyes. And I will say my former fear I felt for the creature was replaced by a clandestine wondrous awe, but such private ruminations I knew not to share with Dusty Cladessa. Brittany Astor's account. I knew teenagers had a capriciously belligerent reputation, at the very best of times. Many of my girlfriends who had sons of a similar age to my son Lincoln all professed to be going through some challenging times, with their teenagers fraught with tension, when they were seen as the enemy. I knew I was lucky with Lincoln. He was such a well-behaved young man, who sailed through school so gallantly and made a great success of his life. Me and my son Winston thought it was in Lincoln's best interests not to know that he was not our biological child. We believed that in the strange circumstances he came to be in our lives, that it was for his well-being, not to know the truth, and sometimes some wounds are best not opened. I had been so blessed to have Lincoln come into my life so fortuitously. I had wrestled with tireless fertility treatments for many years, like lucky dips that were always empty. I was falling apart with my grief. I almost clandestinely hated my girlfriends, who'd fall pregnant at the drop of a hat, and say things like, "I don't know how it happened. We were so careful, but I still fell pregnant anyway." I, on the other hand, was fastidiously taking my temperature, literally doing handstands and squeezing through hula hoops, in the fragile hope that I just might fall pregnant. But my hopes were dashed, like dainty seashells on the shore, being viciously pummelled by the obstreperous waves, and being cruelly broken up into tiny pieces. It was so not fair, and I privately cursed the universe, or God if you like, for throwing me onto a God-forsaken, vacuous path that was leading to absolutely nowhere. I felt as if I was on a vast desert,
with the sand burning my feet and not a soul in sight. The vacuous emptiness I felt was profound. Me and my husband were passionate about having just one baby. That's all we wanted, one baby. But nothing was working. We weren't asking for manna from heaven, or for us to guess the correct lottery number for the $40 million jackpot. All we wanted was one of my little eggs to burst into life. But my seeds seemed to be redundant, and our withering bank account was beginning to suffer the vast costs of failing fertility treatments that were obstinately refusing to work for us. I felt as if all our hopes and dreams had been sucked dry. Dr. Morris Pearson, who was impregnating my eggs with my husband's sperm, was constantly trying to reassure me.
"Never mind, my dear. Better luck next time. You must be prepared for setbacks, you know. They're an inevitable part of the process. But in the end, we'll hit pay dirt. I promise you that."
He would always usher these faint promises without ever meeting my gaze, as even he surreptitiously doubted that this barren woman could hold a baby to full term. I wanted to slap him across the face with an ice-cold hand, wake him up. How many times did he expect me to go through this grueling, emotionally shattering charade that was making me fall apart at the seams? Did he not care about my emotional well-being? One day I was sitting in the waiting room at the fertility clinic, waiting for my husband to arrive, when an angel from heaven chose to sit next to me. There is no other word to describe her than an angel from heaven. I know that sounds bizarre, but everything about this idiosyncratic woman was ethereal, even the way she seemed to just float into the clinic. The woman promptly sat right next to me in the waiting room, on the seat that was privately reserved for my husband, and she looked at my blotchy face and said, "I can see you're upset. You really want a baby, don't you?" I'm ashamed to say I burst into tears, and she put a piece of paper in my hands and said, "Call me. I think I can help you." And then just like that, she disappeared from my sight, and I almost wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the piece of paper I was holding affirmed to me that the woman was here only moments before. I even asked the receptionist if she'd seen the woman. "Did you see that pretty lady that was here just a moment ago?" I asked the receptionist. "She was sitting next to me on this chair here." The receptionist gave me a funny look. "I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone, dear." I put the piece of paper in my purse and proceeded with my appointment, when moments later my husband arrived in the waiting room, flustered and breathing fast, because he had to beat some heavy traffic to get to our appointment on time. The doctor did his usual examination and sat down with me at the desk, with my husband at my side, holding my hand tightly and saying,
"We're not having very much luck at the moment, are we, Mrs. Astor? Your eggs, well, they're not a good quality, I'm afraid."
I don't know what else he said, because I switched off, as if my ears had been blocked with cotton wool balls. I did not want to hear the brutal reason why my inferior eggs were incapable of being impregnated by my husband's sperm. The doctor's apologetic eyes made things far worse. I hated that dreadful look of pity he handed me from across the desk, as if insouciantly passing me a pepper cellar to shake over a steak.
"That's not to say we should give up, Mrs. Astor. One should never, ever give up. There is always hope,"
he said to me. My heart plummeted like a parachuter descending from an aeroplane at a formidable jump to meet a huge drop. My husband squeezed my hand, and in that moment I wanted to implode. Then I knew what I needed to do, and that was to meet up with that mysterious woman that had given me that note. I discovered the note in my purse, and it read, "This is a call you can't afford not to make. It will serendipitously change your life." And so I phoned the young lady in question. I mean, what did I actually have to lose? I did not dare to hope or presume anything, of course. But when I entered the coffee shop and sat in the far corner of the shop that overlooked the pretty street, I felt suddenly more upbeat than I had done for a long, long time. as if I had a profound sense that my life was about to change in ways I never imagined possible. I had told the barrister to send me over a chocolate fudge latte, as I needed something sickly sweet to feed my flagging hope that had become emaciated of late. My heart was fluttering in my chest, as if I could sense something amazing was going to happen. And then there she was, floating in the coffee shop with a face like an angel. The woman was beautiful, with delicate features and long flowing hair. She was wearing a cotton dress, and I realized that she was heavily pregnant, something I had not noticed before. She was about to pop, but in her blue eyes I could see a great sadness. "I believe we can help each other," she told me, "so that we can both have our wishes fulfilled. I want very good parents for my baby, and you want a baby, and I believe I've made a plan that will work in our favour, benefiting the both of us. I have privately organised a caesarean section with my doctor, while my husband is away from the state visiting relatives. I won't be going with him, because I'm too heavily pregnant. When he returns, I will announce I've given birth, and he will meet his baby boy for the first time. I'm willing to put your husband's name on the birth certificate and claim that he is my child's biological father. My husband is so useless with paperwork. He won't suspect a thing, or probably even realise his name should be on a birth certificate in the first place. My husband is dithery about things like that. I'll inform the sheriff that your husband is indeed my boy's real father. When my son is 6 months old, what I want you to do is snatch him from his Moses basket from a beach, while I lure my husband into the ocean for a swim. I know it sounds a little like Moses and the bulrushes, and it probably is a little like that. When we run out of the water, the Moses basket containing my baby will be gone. You will have taken it, while I distracted my husband. When my husband realises our child has been abducted, he won't be able to do a damn thing about it, but the baby will be safe with you. He will go to the sheriff, and the sheriff will humour him. He's a good man, the sheriff, and he has my back. He will tell my husband what he wants to hear, by assuring him that they will search for my baby, when they will know that my baby is being taken care of by his real biological father. This way you legally have a child without the red tape of adoption papers, because I have willingly signed over my baby to his dad." "But why would you do this for us?" I asked. "I just don't understand." The woman unbuttoned her shirt and revealed to me the black bruising on her chest. "Your husband did that to you?" I asked, my mouth dropping open in astonishment. The woman nodded, fighting back tears that were gathering in her eyes. "He's done much, much worse. I've had black eyes before, broken wrists, ankles, you name it. And one of these days he is going to kill me. And he could kill my baby. I cannot put my baby at such risk. When he's angry, he's got no filter. He lashes out like an explosive gas that destroys everything in its wake. And I don't exaggerate when I say this. Let's just say if the right buttons are pressed, the damage from my husband can be brutal. He's like a sitting time bomb, and one day he will bring down our lives in a pile of smoke, and there will be nothing left behind. The sheriff knows this all too well. He's encouraged me to leave my husband for a long, long time. He knows what Dusty is like. No one has time for him in our small town." "But you're pregnant. Who in their right mind beats up a woman, especially a woman carrying a baby? That's insane." "Now you understand why I need to protect my baby, to give him a great life. He deserves that. My baby is my responsibility. Mrs. Astor, don't look so surprised that I know your name. I know a great deal about you. My impression of you is that you will make a fabulous mother for my little boy. I have done my research on you surreptitiously, and questioned all about you at the local gym and among your friends and at the church, without making it obvious as to my true motives. Everyone says what an amazing mother you would be, and how it grieves their heart that all your fertility treatments have failed. One of your friends feels so bad telling you when she's pregnant, because she knows you're probably thinking how unfair it all is, because you've been struggling to conceive. Just so you know, Mrs. Astor, you did not stumble on me randomly or by accident at the fertility clinic, just by chance. I deliberately orchestrated our serendipitous interaction in the waiting room at the fertility clinic. I planned the entire thing. I knew I would find you in an emotional wreck as you waited in the waiting room at the clinic, hanging on to a dream that seemed beyond your reach. I feel I can trust you and your husband to give my child the life he deserves, and that you would be amazing parents to him. She paused for a brief moment, reached out and grabbed my hand, her eyes widening for a moment as she lowered her voice. My husband is a dangerous man, Mrs. Astor. I cannot express this enough. He is extremely volatile, a loose cannon, you could say. I don't trust him around my baby. He's already a suspect in a missing persons investigation, you know. I would be a fool to raise a baby in such a dysfunctional family. You're joking, I said, looking horrified. Why is your husband involved in a missing persons investigation? I don't understand. Well, the evidence is a bit damning, I'm afraid, said the woman. The coincidence is remarkable. He has a blow-up with a man in a bar, and the next day the wife reports the man that my husband threatened and beat up missing. It's all far too convenient. The police believe my husband, Dusty Cladessa, is behind the man's disappearance, but they can't prove a thing, you see. He's managed to find himself useful alibis to cover his back, but the police, they're not stupid, and especially not the sheriff. I know Dusty did something to that man after he went missing. His behaviour was very suspicious. I'm sure you can appreciate why my unborn child, a baby boy, is in grave danger being raised by a man like Dusty. But why don't you just run away with the baby? Find a safe house or something. There are places that can protect a mother and baby. Or you could file charges, could you not, against your husband for beating you up? It's not practical to do that, Mrs. Astor. If I ran away from my husband, he would find me and kill me and raise the baby himself. I cannot allow that to happen. If I filed charges against him, Dusty would arrange someone to kill me from behind prison bars. He's got contacts in dark places, and he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants and what he desires. And what Dusty wants, Dusty gets. Look at this missing persons investigation. They've got nothing on him. He's very shrewd in that regard, let me tell you. I stared at the woman incredulously. What if you want the baby back later on in the day? Maybe you are settled and Dusty's out of the picture. You could legally take him from us. And I couldn't emotionally handle getting attached to your baby and having to give him back to you. That would tear me apart, let me tell you. We'll get some lawyers' letters drawn up if you like. When I hand over the parental rights to your husband, hand on heart, when you take that baby off the beach in that Moses basket, he's yours forever, and there is no going back from this. You will have his birth certificates, your husband's name will be on the certificate. I have a friend who's a journalist, and she will write a fictitious article in the paper about a baby believed to have gone missing on a quiet ribbon of beach in Oregon, to make my husband believe that the police are doing something about the case. My husband is so violent, Mrs. Astor, so I can get the sheriff to persuade him that the police are searching for our baby. I know he will do that for me. As I tell you, he's a good man. He knows how manic and dangerous Dusty can be. He will know my baby is safe with the both of you, and will not disclose any of this information to my husband. I don't want to go through a legal adoption, as it takes far too long, and there is a plethora of ungainly red tape to get through. Besides, the mother does not get the privilege on choosing the right home for her baby, and I have chosen you. Furthermore, Mrs. Astor, we have to go through this unfortunate abduction charade to convince Dusty that the baby has gone. If Dusty knew I wanted to give our baby up for adoption, I may as well book my burial plot. But what about you? What will you do? What about your own safety, my dear? You need to take care of yourself. If your husband has killed before, he will kill again. And with the baby gone,
I imagine he'll be even more volatile."
"Oh, believe me, Mrs. Astor, I know all that. I've got a plan all sorted out, but the less you know about it, the better. All you need to know is that I will sign over all parental rights to your husband legally, as he's listed on the birth certificate as the biological father. I'm going to disappear and begin a brand new life for myself, and I'm going to consider my baby as like a donated egg that I gave to another woman who had fertility issues. In other words, Mrs. Astor, I'm gifting my son to you and to your husband. If you ever want your son to know the truth when he's older, tell him that he was loved very much, which is why I did what I had to do. If you're willing to go through this insane charade to convince my husband our baby was abducted, then my baby is surely yours. And for that you have my word. I don't know anything else that happened during that rendezvous with a woman I would refer to as an angel, as she brought into my life a hope that had abandoned me. The thought of being a mother to her beautiful baby boy gave me boundless joy. I would now be a mother, and there was no greater reward in the entire world. There would be no more trips to the fertility clinic, staring vacantly into the glasses of my doctor, shaking his head sadly and saying,
"Don't you worry, Mrs. Astor. We'll try again. We'll keep trying until something finally works."
Nor did I have to go through the long, arduous adoption route that would take months to procure, and a ton of paperwork, home checks, character references, and God knows what else. Better still, our dwindling bank account had the hope of recovering and recuperating some of its funds, instead of still purging out more of my husband's hard-earned cash, like a broken slot machine, hemorrhaging money on a vacuous set of fruitless fertility treatments. Instead, I'd be spending money productively, buying booties and tiny little jackets, not paying some high and mighty doctor huge bucks to screw up my life still further, with more tangible, heartbreaking disappointments. I didn't have to listen to another one of my girlfriends whittle on and on about how easy it had been to fall pregnant. Instead, I'd be a mother myself, sharing in the similar dramas of dirty diapers, feeds, and all the exhaustive nights when my baby's lungs would confiscate my sleep, that I would willingly sacrifice as a mother to enjoy the benefits of owning a beautiful baby boy. In fact, I welcomed it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I would sacrifice anything to be a mother, and stealing a baby off the beach, risking dusky Claudessa catching me in the act, was a risk I considered worth taking. But I did have a backup plan, if anything were to go wrong. I'd simply tell Dusty Claudessa that I'd found an abandoned baby on the beach, because the parents, of course, weren't there. But nothing was going to go wrong, because I wouldn't let it go wrong. There was far too much to lose. I still remember that day, when I drove into the parking bay that overlooked the quiet ribbon of beach, where I was going to abduct my own baby boy. The notion was ridiculous, but the charade would convince Dusty that his son had indeed vanished into thin air, and that was what he needed to believe. I was very glad that Dusty Claudessa's truck was the only truck in the parking bay that morning. I noticed the main beach was packed with lots of cars. People preferred that busy stretch of coastline, whereas the small ribbon of beach was always forgotten and overlooked. I pulled up in my white SUV, parked right next to Dusty Claudessa's filthy truck, that looked like it hadn't been washed in many months. Once I killed the engine, I sat on my car seat, scanning the beach through a pair of binoculars. Then there they were, Dusty Claudessa with his wife Sylvia. You'd never have guessed that the seemingly benign, innocent, carefree young couple, carrying a Moses basket along the beach with their picnic supplies and cooler, were anything other than a normal couple, strolling along the beach to enjoy a leisurely, lackadaisical day out, to bask in the warm sunshine. I don't doubt Dusty was happy and contented, as abusive people only ever think about themselves, don't they? I knew Sylvia lived her life in abject terror from this man, and I respected her greatly for putting her son's safety ahead of her own desire to keep her baby. She had told me she hadn't spoken to her parents in years on account of this man. They were right about Dusty all along, she told me. They said he was no good, but I was so angry with them for their unkind remarks, so much so that I ran away from home, and I've never seen them since. Why don't you get in touch with them again? I'd asked her. I cannot, she said sadly. For their own safety. If I contact them, Dusty will kill me. He doesn't want me to have anything to do with them anymore. I watched the couple enjoy the picnic on the beach, with hungry seagulls hovering over them, desperate to gain some easy pickings. Sylvia then threw off her dress, wearing her glamorous pink one-piece, and dashed into the water. I shivered just watching her, as the ocean must have been freezing cold, and no one in their right mind would contemplate swimming in water as formidable as this. But that girl was built of strong stuff, and she had guts. Sylvia was laughing and coquettishly calling out to her husband, persuading him to come into the water, and then she put her thumb up. That was her sign to me. I could see it clearly in the binoculars, and my fingers trembled. My heart began to thunder violently in my chest as I climbed out of the car and hurried down some concrete steps towards the beach below. The warm sand rubbed against my bare feet like chafing sandpaper. It was a stroke of luck that there were no other people on the beach, beyond a couple of teenage boys in the furthest distance, sporting baseball hats, dark glasses, and kicking around a ball. I could see the Cladessa couple passionately kissing each other in the bracing water, and my legs almost buckled beneath me as I swooped towards the baby in the Moses basket, like a hungry seagull after a crust of bread. I thought that Sylvia was putting on the performance of her life that would have made Universal Studios proud. If I hadn't known differently, I would believe I was observing a couple wildly in love. For a brief second I stared in wondrous awe at the sweet baby lying fast asleep in the Moses basket, wearing a white onesie and a matching cap, with his tiny eyes closed like two ticks on a piece of paper. The child was adorable. My heart melted like sweet chocolate, but I couldn't afford to dawdle. Time was of the essence. The couple would be out of the water any moment, so given the icy temperature of the water, I needed to make my run quick. The plan Sylvia had painstakingly thought through would go badly awry if I wasn't quick on my feet. Thankfully she was keeping her husband distracted, but they were shivering with cold. With fast, furious breathing, I grabbed the Moses basket and scurried along the beach like a dung beetle, and by the time I reached my car and put the basket on the passenger side seat, I felt exhausted, as if I'd run the Boston Marathon 2 or 3 times over. I felt as if I was about to collapse from sheer exhaustion. "Get a grip," I told myself. "Get a grip, girl." I quickly managed to scramble onto my seat, put on my safety belt, and start up the engine. The couple had now rushed out of the water, shivering with cold and jumping up and down to get warm, while huddling under towels. I did not stay to see what happened next, for the drama would soon unfold, when Dusty Cladessa would face a grim nightmare of wondering what had happened to his baby boy. I felt absolutely no compassion for him. A man like that had not earned the privilege to be a father. "You'll be safe with me, little Lincoln," I told the sleeping baby, as I drove away to begin our new life. In the beginning I barely slept when I took charge over my baby. The town sheriff visited us a couple of times, saying that Dusty Cladessa was getting increasingly frustrated, claiming that the police were not doing a damn thing to investigate the disappearance of his baby boy.
"That man is like a hand grenade," the sheriff told me. "At least the baby is with his real father, where he belongs. I just hope Sylvia will have the courage to leave that man. She refuses to file charges against him. I can't say I blame her. The man is very dangerous. I'm willing to help Sylvia with a few white lies for the greater good. All the townsfolk have her back and are supporting her on this. The less Dusty Cladessa knows, the better." I was to later find out from the town sheriff that Sylvia also disappeared from Dusty's life, and he'd never been able to find her. That woman was shrewd, but I secretly suspected, although I can't prove anything, that the town sheriff had helped Sylvia escape and find for herself a new identity. The man went over and above the call of duty to help people in trouble. Being a mother was the most wonderful experience of my entire life, and I took to it like a duck to water, reveling in all the exhaustion and all the demands that motherhood offered. I embraced it all, and I knew it was a gift that I could never take for granted, and I was so fortunate that my son had grown up into a beautiful, well-rounded young man, loved by everyone. But of late, when he reached 18 years old,
His idiosyncratic, temperamental, belligerent behaviour towards me and his father was less than agreeable. He had started behaving like a petulant, spoilt brat, character trait that had never so much scratched the surface of our lives until now. I had always told my friends how lucky and fortunate I was with my son, as he had not been predisposed to capricious temper tantrums, often seen in other teenagers. But my reassurances were premature, as my son was beginning to become truculently moody. He was sleeping in late, not applying himself to his studies. I'd caught him smoking and drinking to excess, and he'd become as snappy and as cantankerous as a turtle of late, jumping down my throat at every opportunity. My normally very polite teenager was now complaining bitterly about everything, as if I couldn't do anything right, and as if turning 18 had given him the rite of passage to be as obnoxious as possible.
"This chicken casserole is disgusting," he told me over dinner one night. "I might as well be eating pig swill."
He made an obnoxious retching sound from the back of his throat, and used a gesture of sticking his finger down his throat, as if suggesting that my delicious dinner was better off being regurgitated down the toilet. My husband frowned at our son, the edges of his mouth turning downwards, and 2 lines developing between his brows.
"What is this about, Lincoln?" he demanded. "Why are you being so nasty and uncouth to your mother about a perfectly delicious chicken casserole? It's uncalled for and very unkind."
My son wrinkled up his nose in abject disgust, as if inhaling the fumes of the dredges from a dumpster.
"It's nasty," he said. "Why must I tell a lie, just to please you? Isn't it better to tell the truth about things?" "Of course it's better to tell the truth," my husband told my son. "I raised you to tell the truth. But sometimes it's kinder to be malleable with the truth. Bend it a little. It might involve hurting someone's feelings otherwise. Your mother's gone to a lot of trouble on our accounts this evening, making a delicious chicken casserole. And at the very least, you should be grateful and thankful."
My son sniggered.
"You're both very good at bending the truth, aren't you, when it suits your own agenda? You're quite happy to be malleable with it, as you say."
"You are being incredibly rude and ungrateful, Lincoln. I don't know what has got into you this evening. There is nothing wrong with the chicken casserole I cooked for dinner." I had asked him, suspecting that his snide remarks had nothing to do with the chicken casserole at all. But I did wonder if my chicken casserole was as bad as he claimed it was. I personally thought it was absolutely delicious, but was I deceiving myself? I considered myself a reasonably good cook. Had I been deluding myself all these years? Was my son's brazen honesty about my casserole what he had thought about all the dishes I had cooked for him all his life? One morning he came down to breakfast, 2 sheets to the wind, swaggering away like a rowing boat in the water, caught up in a brisk wind.
"You're drunk!"
I gasped.
"You're drunk! And it's only breakfast, Lincoln!"
I looked at my son in horror. He was wearing the clothes he'd slept in overnight. His hair was a furious tangled mess, and it looked as if he'd vomited all over his shirt. My son gave me a gormless, rather manic grin, sat down at the table, slamming down his knife and fork, like a self-entitled brat, demanding to be fed.
"I'm hungry, Mum. I want blueberry pancakes for breakfast and syrup this morning," he said.
"We're not having pancakes this morning," I told him. "Help yourself to cereal. There's granola and almond milk. You can enjoy that." My son made a face.
"Almond milk? Are you kidding? I like milk from a cow, where it comes from naturally. Thank you very much. And I hate your granola. It's only good for the squirrels."
He slammed down his knife and fork on the table furiously.
"You heard me. If I wanted to eat cereal, I'd eat cereal. But I want pancakes for breakfast, and pancakes I will get, because you're going to make them for me, because you love being my mother, don't you, Mum? You'd do anything to be a mother, anything. You've got your wish, haven't you? Make me some pancakes."
I stared at my son as if he was a cantankerous old man having a temper tantrum in a nursing home, giving the carers a hard time with his juvenile insolence. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I asked Lincoln. "You look so sloppy. You're drunk and you're treating me like a skivvy. I'm your mother, not a nursemaid to a snapping turtle."
Well, you signed up for this, didn't you, Mother? When you decided to bring me into your life so conveniently. You wanted all of this. Now you've got it all, haven't you? Wrapped up for you in a pretty paper bag with a bow included. Never mind what it cost to procure. Doesn't matter about that, does it?
I stared at him incredulously, not making any sense of what he was saying. But I knew my son's stinging words could be difficult to comprehend at the very best of times. Certainly with every generation come new words, and some of the texts my son would send me I often had to try and decipher, like Morse code, where he would use capital letters for words like, "Are you okay?" And I was expected to understand what that meant. Why not write the whole word, for goodness sake?
You think you're so clever, Mum. You think your dirty secrets won't get out. But I know all about them, he said, tapping his nose suggestively, and looking at me through eyes blazing with indignation. I know what you did. And with that he gave me what I can only describe as a menacious grin that literally made my skin crawl. He looked like one of those caricature clowns you see on a horror movie. What was wrong with Lincoln? I wondered why he was being so damn mean all the time, spouting venom at both me and Winston, as if we were the enemy, as if he had a vendetta against the both of us. I noticed he was increasingly spending an excess amount of time at his girlfriend's house, and I didn't care a jot, because every time he returned home, it was like a dark thundercloud had stormed into our house, like an unwelcome tornado, and I was always waiting to hear the lightning strikes, so that our peaceful home suddenly became like a house being bombed in World War II. I've heard stories about teenage children often being responsible for poltergeist activity being manifested in their homes, and I could certainly relate, as doors slammed and the occasional pot went flying off a shelf, crashing on the floor, and I knew my son's angry energy was literally manifesting all of this. I wouldn't worry about it at all,
my best friend Vanessa Prattley told me.
I'm actually glad to hear, Brittany, that your son is not so perfect after all. I was beginning to have an inferiority complex that Lincoln was giving you no hiccups along the journey, while the rest of us are being hit by the falling shrapnel of our teenagers' belligerence.
But you don't understand, Vanessa. He's going out of his way to be vindictively spiteful, as if in some way he's enjoying upsetting us.
Join the club, my darling. You're not telling me anything I don't know, said Vanessa, taking my hand in hers. Oh, my God, girl, you really aren't used to the ramblings of a cantankerous teenager, are you? Let me tell you something for nothing. My two boys can be the most obnoxious brats on the face of the entire earth. If I told you some of the things they've said to me of late, your eyes would pop out of your head like stalks, and your hair would almost certainly curl. They have a vocabulary of curse words on them that would probably make a sailor faint. But I don't let it get to me, you know. Teenagers use curse words as a form of artistic expression, I find. Well, that's what I have to tell myself anyway. Suffice to say, they don't spare my feelings either. They sleep in late, have temper tantrums when I ask them to do any household chores, and literally blow a fuse if I insist they cannot go out until they've finished doing their studies. I know that they've smoked pot, as I found the evidence in their bedrooms, joints hidden beneath their undies. In their eyes, the bad guy is always me. I'm the one that lets them down, spoils their fun. I'm constantly told that I'm a horrible mother and that they absolutely despise me.
My word, that is awful, I said. My son has not said that to me yet, but I guess it's only a matter of time before he tells me that.
It goes with the territory of having teenagers, my dear. I thought you were one of the lucky ones who had escaped the belligerence of a teenager's wrath. But it seems that your Lincoln is a late bloomer. My teenagers started being recklessly insubordinate from the age of 14. That's when it got so bad for us. Don't let it get you down, because underneath the grumpy veneer, your son loves you. I have to remind myself that all the time when my sons tell me how unreasonable I'm being. You need to prepare yourself for some cutting words to come. But remember, it is not you. Their hormones are all over the place, and testosterone is an unbridled hormone that in a teenage boy is very difficult and treacherous to manage. It rather reminds me of our puppy Jack, before I got him neutered, you know. He became so aggressive, and once he got the snip, oh my goodness, that dog was a bundle of joy. No longer growled or tried to bite everything that crossed his path. It's the hormones I blame, and teenagers' hormones are all over the place.
You're probably right, I said, feeling a whole lot better about my son's cantankerous outbursts after my reassuring conversation with Vanessa. I realized I had to cut my son some slack. He was going through a tumultuous time. Little did I know or even suspect that my son had learnt a secret that me and my husband had hoped would remain buried for the rest of our lives. We felt that some truths were best not known, but how wrong we were about that. Little did I know that the indignant, angry outbursts that Lincoln was now projecting towards me and my husband Winston were a symptom of a deep underlying fractious problem, after my son had clandestinely discovered that he had been abducted from a beach over 18 years ago, and the parents whom had raised him, teaching him the difference between right and wrong, and how to live a life based on integrity and truthfulness, had been wholly responsible for this seemingly insidious crime. I am certain he must have perceived that the people whom he trusted implicitly and loved faithfully and unconditionally for the last 18 years were not the authentic, law-abiding people he believed us to be. Ostensibly, he had no way of knowing that we had been desperately trying to protect him from knowing that his real father was a volatile, dangerous man, and a personal threat not only to his safety, but our safety as well, for there is no telling what the likes of Dusty Cladessa would be capable of doing were he to find us. Ostensibly, had we known the bitter raw truth that Lincoln was in touch with his biological father, we would have felt as vulnerable and as fragile as pigeons caught up in a cat's powerful jaws. Because if Dusty Cladessa had found us, we were almost certainly looking at a death wish, and lightly now living on borrowed time. I cannot imagine what was going on in our son's confused, rather muddled teenage brain, and I am not surprised he was spitting with fury like a tormented cobra, as had I been wearing his shoes, I'm not certain how I would react, realizing that everything I thought I knew about myself was based on a lie. So I imagine his outraged outbursts had nothing to do with his teenage hormones going awry. I became alarmingly worried over the whereabouts of my son when I had not heard from Lincoln for the whole weekend, which was exceedingly odd, because we kept in touch with each other daily. I tried to contact him on his cell phone, but my messages kept going to voicemail, and his girlfriend Tamara claimed she hadn't seen him for a few days, and this aroused in me a great deal of discord and uncertainty, as I knew that Lincoln was going through a tough time of late. But Lincoln not being in touch with me was certainly incongruous behaviour, and so my maternal instincts were firing on all cylinders with a profound sense of prognostication that something was terribly wrong, and even my guts were recoiling, as deep inside me I could taste a sense of foreboding that was as bitter as gall.
But I don't understand, Tamara. I was under the impression that Lincoln was spending the entire weekend with you, and you're saying that you haven't actually seen him.
Sorry, Mrs. Astor. He's lying to you. He's been acting strangely recently, Mrs. Astor, and if you must know, I ended our relationship. He was getting seriously weird. He said some really mean things to me that you just can't take back. Frankly, if I never see him again, it'll be too soon, Mrs. Astor. He told me that the glasses I wear make me look like an owl, and that the clothes I wear are cheap and tarty. He's never said that to me before. He was so unkind. It was like I couldn't do anything right. Everything I did he criticised. When I put my picture up on social media after I'd been to a birthday party, he said I was trying to flaunt myself to other boys, that I was a real floozy. I can't let him degrade me like this, Mrs. Astor. I've got my self-respect, you know. Of course you have, my dear. It's very unusual for my son to behave like that. I honestly don't know why he's been so unkind to you. If it makes you feel any better, he's been like that with us of late, behaving very strangely. But I'm just surprised he's not with you. I'm very concerned about his whereabouts. Well, I hope you find him, Mrs. Astor, but I'm sorry I can't help you. I was stunned that even my son's girlfriend wanted to regurgitate him, as if he was a rancid meal she'd like to eliminate. What was ailing my son? And more to the point, where was he? But then I got the phone call that would rattle our lives like a storm brewing at sea, beating against the bows of a ship with a forceful intensity.
Hello, Mrs. Astor. I expect you've been waiting for a phone call. You're probably wondering where your son is,
came a man's hostile voice.
I have kidnapped your son, Mrs. Astor, and I'd like $20,000 in cash, and then you will get him back. No questions asked. I have him here with me. Just so you know, if you dare involve the police, I will kill your son. Do you understand what I'm saying? So don't think of playing any funny games with me, because I will know what you're up to.
Sorry, who on earth is this? Is this some kind of a joke?
This is no joke, Mrs. Astor.
You've got my son. You've kidnapped my son. I just don't understand. Why would you do this? We're not millionaires, you know. We don't have lots of money. I need proof you've got my son. Please, can I speak to him now? The next thing I could see was my son staring at me on the camera of the cell phone. Mum, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. And then the video is snapped off. I gasped. It was my son that had been kidnapped. For a pitiful $20,000. Was this some kind of sick, macabre joke? I had watched movies about kidnappings before. But kidnapping someone for a sizable amount of money, not a pitiful $20,000. This was crazy. I don't know who the hell you are or what you think you're doing, but this is insane. You need to give me my son back. I need to speak to him now. I need to see that he's all right, I told the man, who was staring at me through the camera wearing a balaclava over his head and waving around a very threatening-looking rifle, which he pointed directly at my son to get his message across clearly. I could see my son in the picture, cowering like a frightened-looking animal, looking so apologetic in the camera, and I cringed in horror when I saw some black bruising on his cheeks. This man clearly meant business. My son had been beaten up, and there was no mistaking the terror in his eyes.
Mrs. Astor, now that you see I do have your son, and that I have kidnapped him, you and your husband are to come to this beach. The address you will find at the bottom of this postbox on a piece of paper. When you go out to your postbox, you will find it there, because I put it there myself. I will meet you on that beach with your husband at 12 o'clock tomorrow night. If you involve the police, your son is dead. I've done this before, Mrs. Astor, and I deliver on my promises. And when I say your son is dead, I do not joke. Your son is dead. This is only $20,000 we're talking about, no more and no less. So there is no excuse. You do not need to involve the police. I have a clandestine way of tracking your actions, Mrs. Astor, which I shall not divulge to you. You and your husband need to come to this beach alone, where the exchange will occur, and you will get your son back. Once you have brought the $20,000 in cash with you. You are lucky, Mrs. Astor, for I am not asking for a lot of money. I never do. I keep the money small, but I do business this way. So I don't need to listen to your excuses, because you can easily get hold of $20,000.
And with that, the phone call just ended. I was astonished. I couldn't believe what was happening. When my husband learnt about my son's abduction, he was mortified. But Winston is a kind of man that keeps his emotions in check and doesn't fall apart at the first hint of a disaster, which is usually what I will do.
Well, I have heard of a similar case, recently with a drug addict abducting a couple's young daughter, he said. They got her back after they paid a ransom of $35,000, I believe it was. The story never even got leaked to the press, even after the event. The guy would have killed their daughter without a doubt if they'd involved the police. They cleverly did not. Drug addicts can sometimes cross unreasonable boundaries that are exceptionally unpalatable to the rest of us. But this addict was so desperate for drugs, he would stop at nothing to attain them. In the end, he was arrested, I believe, but died of a heroin overdose. So never got to serve a long-term prison sentence. The drugs completely scrambled his brains. But he had abducted over a dozen people this way, to get his hands on large sums of cash.
So you think it is a junkie that took our son? But, it just doesn't make any sense. How on earth did this happen? Where did he meet this man? You don't think it could be Dusty Cladessa, do you? Tracing our son after all these years? It is a possibility, is it not?
Don't be ridiculous, sweetheart. Dusty wouldn't operate like this. He would be here in a heartbeat and would literally decapitate us at the first opportunity. There is no way Dusty Cladessa could have found Lincoln anyway. He knows his son was abducted from that beach. He'd never be able to trace his whereabouts. We've been very careful, and you heard Sylvia Cladessa. Her husband was not the brightest brick in the block. Didn't even think to check his own son's birth certificate. So no, of course it's not Dusty Cladessa. He'd never have been able to locate our son. Besides, we've covered our tracks very well, even though we haven't needed to, and the sheriff has helped us as well. He probably thinks Lincoln is living under a different identity, with a fake birth certificate somewhere, possibly acquired from a deceased name. He has no idea we've got his son.
But are you sure? Are you sure this is not Dusty Cladessa? Because if it is, we're in terrible trouble.
I'm confident it is not Dusty Cladessa. They're trying their luck at extortion, whoever they are. We'll give them the $20,000. We won't involve the police. It's a small sum of money that we can afford.
But don't you think we should call the sheriff? It might be a good idea, just to be certain.
No, I don't think we should call him, sweetheart. If this man is being serious, he may harm our son. We simply cannot put our son's life at risk. Maybe we're being watched by this man. You don't know if he's rigged stuff around here.
It was with a great deal of reluctance and a duffel bag containing $20,000 that my husband managed to get his hands on in cash notes, that in the dead of night, the following evening, we made our way to the address on the piece of paper. In truth, I felt as if I'd been cast to play a part in a movie, and I certainly persuaded myself as much, so that I could hold my emotions in check, as if I did not, I would fall apart. I was in no doubt that this dreadful man had already hurt my son, and how I wished I could take Lincoln's place in a heartbeat, so that he didn't have to suffer. I was so concerned about what he was going through.
We are to meet our son's abductor on the beach, according to this note. I understand it's not a private beach, my husband told me. It deceptively looks to be such. It is well hidden, I believe, by groves of trees. I suspect the abductor felt this would be a good place to make the exchange, because he won't be seen. But there is a house on the property. Someone could be there. It is someone's private address.
Well, isn't that weird? Why would he want us to be, handing over money, on a beach like this?
Well, I think it's unlikely that anybody is at the property, said my husband. Maybe it's a holiday home, and the owners are away. The abductor has made sure he's chosen a meeting point where he is not going to be disturbed or seen. He's chosen this place on purpose, I'm sure. He wants us to park our car outside a yellow front door. He was very specific about that. He wants us to go down some concrete steps to the beach below with our duffel bag. He will meet us there, and that is where the exchange will occur. He will then hand us our son. That's what the note says very specifically.
We drove in a stiff, awkward silence, neither of us having the ability to speak, as if all our words were trapped inside us, unwilling to come out, like the last remaining toothpaste left in a tube. The tension in the car was palpable. You could have cut it with a knife. Me and my husband were fraught with tension, unable to envisage what the night would hold for us. We drove past vast stretches of magnificent beach and rugged coastline. At the dead of night, the prepossessing views had been obliterated by a veil of velvet blackness that had scribbled out all the details of everything. Our car bounced buoyantly up and down bumpy roads that had been purged of all traffic, for we saw not a solitary soul in sight. In truth, we felt like the only two people left on the entire planet after Armageddon had struck. The hostile night was vengefully tenebrific, the soupy, thick, clawing air warm and tepid, the feeling in my heart cumbersome and heavy, as every panicking thought in my head was balancing on a tightrope of abject terror, as I considered my son, and I was praying with all my heart that he had been treated favourably by his abductor. I was playing with my shirt nervously, with clammy, sweaty fingers, my throat thick with a bitter taste that I could not expunge, and my guts felt as if they were filled with a team of slippery eels that were slithering in and out of my stomach cavity. My husband's robustly built, ungainly green SUV weaved down the sequestered country road, past lofty congregations of trees that all appeared to be lumpy, misshapen cardboard cutouts on the horizon that were only vaguely discernible, so that everything looked inauspiciously airy and hauntingly monotonous. Indeed, the conditions of the night were so sinister and murky, so that if a ghostly entity had morphed onto the road ahead of us, I probably would not have batted an eyelid. This was the kind of night where, although guarded, I was game for almost anything to happen. The unpleasant, creepy warm air clung to me like the silken fibres of a spider web, as a feeling of impending doom seemed to weave around my intuition like a burgeoning rambunctious vine, whispering into my guts in a small, still warning voice that something was going to go terribly wrong. But I refused to listen to that sagacious voice. All I cared about was getting my son safely back home, away from this horrendous man who had taken him hostage. The bright headlights of Winston's SUV pierced through the crippling darkness.
"I believe this is it,"
said Winston, pointing to a sign that led through the trees which read, Ocean Spray House. We found ourselves on a long driveway that led to a beautiful house with 2 front doors, nestling on a rocky outcrop, which probably overlooked spectacular sea views. My husband drew up outside the yellow front door, but I noticed the entire house was swathed in darkness, as if there was not a solitary soul around. The people that probably owned this house were away. There were a couple of outside lights on, swathing the house in a bluish light. I could not expunge the portentous feeling that we were being watched. Was my son's abductor observing us, I wondered? At least he would see we had come alone, and had not involved the police as we had promised.
"Are you ready?"
my husband asked me, who had killed the engine of the car. I nodded. "I'll be ready. Just give me just 2 seconds to take a couple of deep breaths," I said. "I'm just so worried about poor Lincoln. You should have seen how scared he was on that video. I'm so worried about him. Suppose this man has hurt him."
"Monster," said my husband under his breath. "Bloody monster. If I could get my hands on him, I'd kill him myself," he growled. "What is the world coming to these days, that people are abducting our children for cash, just to support a drug habit? It's sick. That's what it is, sick. But I have no regrets we didn't involve the police, sweetheart. You don't play games with deranged men like this, because this man could be capable of anything."
I winced at my husband's words, like a frightened animal that had been severed by a predator's mighty claws, but I was privately agreeing with his comments. When we got our son back, we could put this all behind us and move on with our lives, forget it ever happened. But I was in no doubt that this insidious man would likely pull a similar stunt on some other poor unsuspecting family like us, in order to fund his drug habit. I was quite sure he had possibly pulled this stunt many times before, and would likely do it again and again. Me and my husband Winston reluctantly exited the vehicle with a vacillating hesitancy, feeling as vulnerable and fragile as 2 turtles without their shells, embarking on troubled waters, not knowing what the ocean current was like, or whether we'd be swept away by the tumultuous, turbulent current into unforgiving, hostile waters, capable of dragging us under its depths to a watery grave. We trudged down some concrete steps built into the hilly outcrop towards the beach. My husband held my hand tightly in his, while he held the duffel bag in his other hand. We were both wearing head torches on our heads, and abandoned our flip-flops once we reached the cool, granular beach sand. It was hard to believe that this was not a private beach, for it certainly seemed as such. The owners in the large house were clearly away, but for them it must have been an idyllic location to live, where they could enjoy the privileges of languishing lazily on a beach all to themselves. We walked across the ribbon of beach, greeted to the sounds of the obstreperous waves crashing against the sand violently, and charging towards the shore like hundreds of galloping white stallions, made out of white bubbles. There was a half-moon bashfully piercing through the firmament, and some pretty stars peeking through the black veil, like cheeky children's faces staring down shyly at us, as if hoping to have a bird's-eye view as to what was to soon unfold on this beach. Even though it was pleasantly warm, I shivered with the cold of a great apprehension, wondering what would happen next. It seemed like we were alone, but not for long. We saw my son's abductor walking across the beach sand towards us, in a purposeful, determined stride. He was wearing a balaclava over his head, and carrying an intimidating high-powered rifle in his hands, which he pointed directly at us. He began to issue demands that went over my head, because I was so terribly afraid. The man looked exactly like one of those horrifying terrorists you see on the news, dressed ominously all in black. He was unabashedly pointing the rifle at us, demanding to see that we were not carrying any weapons on our person.
"We've come in peace. We're unarmed,"
said my husband, holding his hands above his head.
"We don't want any shenanigans. We haven't involved the police as we promised. All we want is our son back. We brought you the money you asked us. We are only here on our own." "You'll see your son soon enough," said the man, hurriedly opening the duffel bag to inspect the contents. "It's all there," my husband assured him. "So now, please can we have our son back? That was our agreement." "You want your son back? That's rich," said the man with a growl. "You'd like your son back, would you? Is that right? I'd have liked my son back 18 long years ago. But no such luck, because you both stole him from a beach in his Moses basket." He laughed mockingly. "Ha ha! You think I called you here for 20,000 measly dollars? Hardly likely. I called you here to make you accountable for what you did all those years ago. You robbed me of my son. You stole from me the most precious person in my life."
He pulled off his black balaclava, staring at us with furious blue eyes that were burning with rage.
My name is Dusty Cladessa, just so you know. And would you like any last words before I blow your head off and cast your bodies out to sea for the fishes to eat? I've been waiting for years and years to get my revenge on you. And the moment I have waited for all my life has finally arrived. I hoped the day would come when I would come face to face with the couple who chose to steal my son from his Moses basket. Do you know how long and hard I have been searching for my son? But I knew one day I would find him, and one day the huge wrong would be righted, because Karma, my friend, is a bitch, and now the debt needs to be paid in your spilt blood. I bet you're wondering to yourselves how I managed to find your son. Well, surprise, surprise, he put his DNA online and we were a perfect match. Imagine what your poor son thought when he realized his whole life was built on a lie, and the parents he thought were decent people had stolen him from a beach all those years ago, and that this heartbroken mother of his was so full of grief she ran away, never to be seen again. You people destroyed my life that day. You took my son, and you stole my wife, and now I'm going to return the favor by robbing you of the privilege of even breathing the same air that I breathe.
Dusty Cladessa was the most unhinged, terrifying man that I have ever met. He was waving his rifle around precariously, and there was a gormless grin on his face that turned my blood icy cold.
It's not what you think, Mr. Cladessa. You think I abducted your son from the beach, but you're wrong about that. I did not. Yes, I took him from the beach in his Moses basket, I admit that. But your wife, Sylvia, signed over your son to us. She orchestrated the whole charade on the beach so that you would believe your son had been stolen. She did not want her son to grow up under your charge. She didn't trust you an inch. Liar! Liar! Screamed Mr. Cladessa. How dare you make this all up? I'm not making this up, Mr. Cladessa. Really, I'm not. It's all true. You can ask my husband. The abduction of your child was a cover-up for his own protection and well-being. Even the sheriff saw you as a great danger, and he humoured you by assuring you that they were searching for your child, when in reality he knew exactly where Lincoln was. Your wife put my husband's name on the birth certificate.
The next thing I know is that Dusty Cladessa came up to me and slapped me so violently hard across the face that I was surprised that the impact of his violent punch did not actually snap my neck.
Liar! He shrieked. Liar! Why are you making this stuff up? My wife, Sylvia, would never have betrayed me like this. She was a good woman.
I promise you it's true, Mr. Cladessa. It's true. My husband lunged towards Dusty and began to wrestle with him for the rifle. My husband is a strong man, and he knew that Dusty Cladessa was going to kill us. There was no doubt in his mind, or my mind, that this is what he intended to do to us. So I watched in horror as both men wrestled each other on the beach. I began to scream so loudly. I remember thinking that I wished the screaming would stop. It sounded like a television blaring away at top volume, that you wanted to shut up. But I soon realized that the screaming was coming from me. I was the one making this insane noise that echoed loudly across the beach. Lincoln's account. Imagine what it must be like for you when you think your whole life has been built on a lie. The two people you trusted more than life itself had done something so dreadful it seemed incomprehensible, and I would never have found out any of this if I hadn't put my DNA online and discovered I was a match with a man called Dusty Cladessa, who was in fact my biological father. I remember thinking there had to be some dreadful mistake with the DNA results, but the DNA was absolutely accurate. Dusty Cladessa was indeed my biological father. I thought I must have been adopted, and both my parents had chosen not to tell me that I was not their biological child. It irked me greatly that they would keep something like this from me. I think it is intrinsically wrong not to tell your children the truth about their biological bloodline. Everyone should know where they come from. Did my mother and dad not realize that regardless of whether they were my biological parents or not, they would always be my real mother and father to me? When Dusty Cladessa revealed that I had been snatched from a beach in a Moses basket, I thought he'd lost leave of his senses. It seemed like something from a movie. He informed me my biological mother, a woman called Sylvia Cladessa, had been so utterly devastated to lose me that she had left Dusty a note telling him she would be back, but had never returned. She couldn't handle the fact that you'd been snatched, he told me. It broke my wife's heart. I remember feeling such disgust towards my parents, wondering how they could be capable of being so damn treacherous by stealing me from a lovely couple on a beach. Did I know these people who claimed to love me so unconditionally, if they were capable of such a great evil? It was like my loyalty had been split into two parts, as I loved my parents. But even though I did not know Dusty, he was still my biological father. I begged Dusty Cladessa not to go to the police. You must understand, I still love my parents very much, I told him, despite what they've done. I certainly don't want them to get into trouble or to go to jail. They've done so much for me in my life. Dusty told me he had no time for the police, and how they had done a shoddy job all those years ago in trying to find me. Furthermore, there were no newspaper articles about my disappearance, beyond a small article in the back of a paper that was so vague no one would have taken the writing seriously. The police are useless, said Dusty. Useless. Don't you worry, my son. It's all water under the bridge now. I won't dob your parents into the police, given that they've given you a good life. But I want to get to know my son better. I want to make up for all the lost time. I decided that Dusty Cladessa was obviously a good man. He could understand my loyalty to my parents, and despite the fact they had abducted me all those years ago from a beach, he recognized and respected that they had given me a good life, and was not going to seek revenge on them. When I met Dusty Cladessa for the first time, it was at a coffee shop, and it was a little awkward at first, I have to admit. I had felt incredibly uncomfortable meeting a perfect stranger, but I soon began to relax in his company, and decided I rather liked the man, although there was something about him I found a tad unsettling, although I couldn't decide what that was. I spent a couple of weekends at his beachside property, pretending to my parents that I was staying with my girlfriend Tamara. But it was on the third weekend I spent with Dusty that the weekend went badly awry. We had been walking on the beach together, and then he told me he wanted to show me the outbuilding on the edge of the property that had not been used for many years. The outbuildings were in reasonably good condition, but were old and covered in dust and cobwebs, and Dusty was telling me that he was going to turn them into a workshop. He was interested in fixing up an old car from the 1950s, and such a revelation really excited me, because I love old cars. Then what happened next astounded me. All I remember was receiving a big blow on the head and passing out, so everything went completely black. I remember nothing until I woke up from my delirium, finding myself lying on a narrow mattress on the floor with my hands and feet tied together. I was very confused and bewildered. What the hell? Dusty was sitting on an upside-down paint tin in the outbuilding, just staring at me with a manic look on his face. And in that moment I realized there was more to the story of my abduction than actually met the eye. This man, although he was my biological father, was clearly not right in the head. He was unstable and unhinged, and clearly dangerous. He belonged in a psych ward, not functioning in modern-day society. "It was you," I said. "Why did you knock me out like that? I'm your son, for goodness sake," I said, touching my head with my hands, which was throbbing violently from the hard blow. I couldn't believe that my own father had beaten me up like this.
"That's why I knocked you out, son. Because you are my biological son. Your name is not Lincoln, it's Howard. You are not thinking straight, son. I have to knock some sense into that head of yours." because you are my son. I cannot believe how protective you are towards the two treacherous people that dared to steal you from your Moses basket on the beach all those years ago. Your parents need to pay for what they've done to me. Do you really think I'm going to sit back, let them enjoy their lives after they abducted you from that beach all those years ago? Do you? He said, growling at me. They're going to pay for what they did, and you are going to help me make them pay. We're going to teach them a lesson they will never forget, he said, smacking his lips, with the same satisfaction you might feel after enjoying a delicious steak dinner. It made me sick to the stomach. I began to tremble and shake. My heart was literally thundering against my chest, as if a freight train was running right through me. You're not going to harm my parents, are you, Dusty? Please, I beg you, don't harm them. Please, for my sake, don't harm them. I love them, Dusty. You need to realize that. I know what they did was wrong, but they're good people. If you hurt them, I'll never be able to forgive you. You're defending two people who've done a grievous evil, son. Listen to what you're saying. You are not thinking straight. I'm going to make them pay a ransom for taking you from the beach all those years ago. My parents aren't loaded, Dusty. If you're wanting a payout, you're going to be disappointed. I'm going to ask for a small ransom. $20,000. I think they can afford to pay that, don't you?
Everything that happened on that inauspicious weekend is like a foggy, ambiguous blur for me, as if I'm looking back on those events through a misted window pane. What I do know is that in a trice I became terrified of my biological father. Recognizing at once he was capable of a great evil, I became grievously concerned about my parents' welfare and safety, as Dusty Claudessa would stop at nothing to extinguish their memory from this earth. He kept going on and on about how we belonged together as father and son, but how he also needed to extinguish the cockroaches first. Thankfully he did remove the constraints from my hands and feet, if I promised to behave myself, that is. But he kept me locked up like a prisoner in the outbuilding, and was injecting me with a drug that made me feel very woozy the whole time, so that half the time I wasn't sure what was actually going on, and was a bit wobbly on my knees, as if my entire world was spinning. I remember he kept saying to me, "It's for your own good, son. I'm doing this for the both of us, so we can enjoy the life we deserve together, father and son, the way it should be. I know you don't understand what I'm doing, because you've been brainwashed by your parents, but one day you'll thank me for all of this." I recall my mother's horrified face on the phone when Dusty told her he'd kidnapped me, and to prove his point he thrust the camera in my face. All I could say from my cracked, parched throat was, "I'm sorry, Mum, I'm sorry." My mum was crying on the phone. "Are you all right, son? He hasn't hurt you, has he?" I could feel the tears in my eyes threatening to fall, but I managed to hold them back. I couldn't bear to see the distress on my mother's face. Dusty assured my mother that she'd only get me back for $20,000. Dusty made my mother believe that I'd randomly been kidnapped by him, and he just wanted $20,000 in cash for my return. They were not to involve the police under any circumstances, or he would kill me. I had a horrifying feeling that Dusty Claudessa wanted a lot more than just $20,000 from my parents. I think he wanted to give them the impression that he was a drug addict, desperate for a large stash of money to support his habit. I knew that he had an insidious plan up his sleeve, and he then informed me in my blurry state that $20,000 was just a ruse so that he'd get my parents onto that beach, and then he would slaughter them like a couple of farm animals in an abattoir, and then toss their bodies out into the ocean.
They need to pay for what they've done. They're both a pair of cockroaches. Then you and I can be together again, son. We can move to Alaska, get a cabin together, live off the land."
He proceeded to tell me he'd killed before, and the evidence had never been found, and he'd kill again without any problems, and I emphatically believed every word of it. I knew there was no reasoning with a man like this.
Please don't hurt my parents. Please don't. I know what they did was wrong, but I promise you they're good people. They raised me well.
Don't hurt them." Dusty then clobbered me across the face so hard with a powerful fist. I don't think I've felt a greater pain before.
"Sorry, son. It's for your own good. You've been brainwashed by your parents. They're not good people. But the evil will be wiped away. When I get them on that beach, it'll be extinguished under a pearly moon, and you will thank me for it. Your parents will be meeting me on the beach, and they will bring the $20,000 to me in cash. I'm going to watch them beg for their lives as I blow their heads off,"
he said, waving his rifle around with a satisfied smirk on his face. I was cupping my cheek because it was stinging and burning, and I stared at Dusty incredulously. I felt as if I was going to be violently sick. This man was going to kill my parents, and I could do nothing to stop him. I was so very glad that this maniac had not raised me. He was seriously deranged. I needed to do something to derail his plans. I didn't know how to reason with a psychopath. This man, who was my biological father, did not love me. His only love he had for it was himself, and he wanted to extract revenge on anyone or anything that dared to cross his path and upset the apple cart of his life.
"Let me go," I demanded. "You're not well in the head. I'm glad my parents abducted me. You're the one that's sick, not them."
What happened next was Dusty grabbed me aggressively by the shoulders and shook me violently hard. His body contorted like a demoniacal gargoyle as he hissed at me like a python.
"How dare you talk to your father like this? You need to learn some respect, my son. I can see your pathetic parents didn't teach you to mind your manners. Everything I'm doing is for you. But you'll soon understand when you finally learn a bit of gratitude, which is sadly lacking in your life."
He then clobbered me again so hard on the head with his fist that I blacked out, and that was all I remembered until I woke up and came to in the middle of the night in this lonely, sequestered outbuilding. At first I felt confused, as if my memory was blank, as I tried to make sense of my bearings. What was I doing here? I was lying on a thin, narrow mattress, covered with a light blanket and a pitiful pillow that smelt of damp and mildew, in an outbuilding. There were long horizontal shelves on the furthest wall covered in old paint cans, and on one corner was a selection of yard tools clustered together in a large tangled heap, and everywhere was covered with silken fibre of old spider webs. There were old bicycles, babies' prams, and boxes of books that had been haphazardly dumped in the space. One wall was lined with piles of firewood that had long since been forgotten about. It was dark and oppressive in the outbuilding, but a soft moonlight flooded through a window, so I could discern exactly where I was. I began coughing and spluttering and sneezing, as I was breathing in some of the disturbed dust. I could see a couple of mice scampering between the paint cans, and a spider caught up in a glistening web that glowed in the dark and looked quite ethereal. I then remembered everything that had happened, and my skin crawled. Dusty Claudessa was going to lure my parents onto the beach and kill them, and I had to put a stop to this madness. I was pleased to discover that I was no longer wobbly on my knees. I suspect after Dusty had knocked me out, he'd forgotten to drug me to keep me in that drowsy state. My head was throbbing violently, but I staggered awkwardly to my feet and managed to find a huge trowel, which I began banging the door with. I had to break it down in some way. I was screaming out loudly at the top of my lungs, calling out for help until my throat became as scratchy as sandpaper. Then something quite bizarre happened. Something was breaking down the door of the outbuilding, and when the door collapsed I found myself staring at a male Bigfoot, and he was staring at me through dark, benevolent eyes. Before I could react or faint from shock, the creature just nodded at me and glided away, before I could even thank him for releasing me from my confinement. But I had a profound sense that the creature was actually following me, as if it picked up on my frenzied energy. I grabbed the yard trowel and staggered to the beach rather precariously. I could hear my mother's frantic screams. I could see two men involved in a violent scuffle together, and I knew it was my dad and Dusty Claudessa, and my father was losing this battle. My mother appeared to be watching the scene, as if she was like a waxwork statue. She didn't even move a muscle. She was so terrified. Dusty Claudessa had his thick fingers around my father's throat and was squeezing, and I ran towards my father, screaming at the top of my lungs, "Stop! Stop!" I was about to whack Dusty across the head with a trowel in my hand when I heard the shrieking sound. It sounded like a woman being murdered. I looked up to see the Bigfoot barreling across the beach at lightning speed, shrieking at the top of his lungs in a strange language. "Ogela! Motola atila kakwani hotala!" He swung his arms backwards and forwards, and the words that came into my head were, I warned you, but you wouldn't listen, would you? It's too late for my mercy, it's too late. You're a liability." The Bigfoot reached the two scuffling men. He grabbed Dusty's rifle and broke it in half, as if it was just a kid's toy. I'll never forget Dusty's face as the Bigfoot plucked him off my father, as if he was removing a blood-sucking leech from a human body, and he threw Dusty over his shoulders and ran into the icy cold water of the ocean, while Dusty began kicking and screaming. Dusty looked like a porcelain doll on the Bigfoot's shoulders. I could hear some splashing sounds, some gurgling, and then everything sounded eerily quiet, and the Bigfoot returned with a limp body that he threw onto the beach like an old piece of seaweed. Dusty was dead, having been drowned by the Bigfoot. He lay there on the beach with glazed eyes like a dead fish, and all I felt was relief that he was finally gone. The Bigfoot looked from me to my mother and dad, scratched his head, and spoke to us in a language all three of us actually understood. "Kolopati, natilanikwa." I wanted to do that for a long time. The man is rotten to the core. Gilatila, motola mika. I gave him a chance, but he would not relinquish his dark energy. Kotola pisanikwa. Don't worry, he did not suffer. Kolotolo. His passing was fast and painless. Potoli sinikwa. Best way to go is through the water. Pleasant passing. And with that, he glided away. My mother and father collapsed into each other's arms with relief, and I realized then how lucky I was to have two such amazing parents. I knew that angels can come in many forms. The angel that rescued us was dark and hairy. Furthermore, he made Dusty's passing look like an accidental drowning, which was fortunate. My parents grabbed me in their arms, and we all cried with immense gratitude to be reunited together, and I learnt soon how I came to being abducted from a beach, and how it had all been deliberately planned, and everything made perfect sense to me. My biological mother had sacrificed so much on my behalf to secure my safety. I knew next that I would try to find her whereabouts, and with the help of the retired sheriff, I was reunited with her 5 years later, and was able to meet my two half-brothers, Steve and Willis, and my stepfather, Fred. The first thing my real mother said to me was it was the very best decision she'd ever made to leave me in the Moses basket on the beach for my mother to retrieve. I chose your mother very, very carefully, you know. I refused to go through the adoption process. It's too dreadful. I was a step ahead of the game and never regretted my decision. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.